Ralph Waldo Emerson, born in 1803 in Boston, Massachusetts, was a thinker whose ideas would echo through the quiet rhythms of 19th century America, from the early loss of his father to his years of quiet reflection in the woods of New England. Emerson's life was one of intellectual inquiry, personal discovery, and profound connection to nature. His writings, rich with thoughts on individuality, self-reliance, and the spiritual bond between humanity and the natural world, laid the foundation for the American Transcendentalist movement. Emerson's journey was not marked by dramatic events, but by a steady unfolding of the insight. His mind, always at work, sought the deeper truths hidden in the simplest moments of life. Through his essays, lectures, and poetry, he quietly challenged conventional thought and inspired generations to think for themselves, trust their inner voice, and embrace the world as it is. As you listen, let the peaceful unfolding of Emerson's life carry you through time, each chapter passing as calmly as the hours of a quiet evening. If you find solace in this story, feel free to like, subscribe, and share where you're listening from. For now, settle in and allow Emerson's life to gently unfold, offering you a journey through the steady course of his thoughts and reflections. Ralph Waldo Emerson was born on May 25, 1803 in Boston, Massachusetts, into a family with deep roots in religion. His father, William Emerson, was a well-respected Unitarian minister who preached with quiet conviction and intellectual rigor. His mother, Ruth Haskins Emerson, came from a prominent New England family. Though the family had some wealth and respect within their community, they were still deeply connected to their faith and values, which would influence Ralph throughout his life. Emerson's early childhood was marked by a certain tranquility, though his life would soon be shaped by loss. At the age of 8, Ralph's father passed away from tuberculosis. This early experience of grief would stay with Emerson for much of his life, but rather than causing him to retreat, it seemed to deepen his reflections. His mother, Ruth, a gentle yet strong woman, raised him with compassion and care, and her quiet influence would remain an undercurrent in his life. Young Emerson, quiet by nature, often retreated into his thoughts. He was a studious child, but more than that, he was a contemplative one. Even as a boy, Emerson was drawn to nature and to the world of ideas. His mind was full of questions about the universe and the nature of human existence, questions that would become central themes in his later work. Though he was raised in a religious household, it was clear that young Ralph's understanding of the world would not be limited to what was taught in Sunday school. The early years in Boston, filled with the rhythms of family, church, and school, set the stage for Emerson's intellectual and spiritual growth. Though his father's death cast a shadow over his early life, it also began to shape his sense of individuality and his yearning for truth. In the stillness of those early years, Emerson began to form the foundation of his worldview, a worldview that would come to emphasize the importance of the self and the connection between human beings and the natural world. In many ways, Emerson's early life in Boston was defined by his quiet introspection. As a young boy, he spent hours walking in the woods, observing nature, and reading whatever books he could find. His intellectual curiosity was unhurried, reflecting a deep, steady rhythm that would guide him throughout his life. It was in these formative years that the seeds of Emerson's philosophy were planted, nurtured in the peaceful solitude of his early years. These early experiences of grief, reflection, and quiet observation would remain with Emerson for the rest of his life. They would serve as the foundation for his understanding of the world and the self, of the importance of nature, and of the need for individuals to trust their inner voice. As we move forward in this journey through Emerson's life, we will see how these early experiences would continue to influence his thinking, as he grew from a boy who quietly observed the world to a man who would forever change how people viewed themselves and their connection to the world around them. Ralph Waldo Emerson's early years of education were spent in the quiet, structured environment of Boston, where the foundations of his intellectual journey were laid. After the death of his father, his mother Ruth took it upon herself to nurture Ralph's education. Emerson was sent to the Boston Latin School, one of the oldest schools in America, which had a tradition of academic rigor and scholarly discipline. Though Emerson was a bright student, his true talents would not always conform to the rigid expectations of the school. Instead, his educational experiences at this time were marked by a sense of quiet rebellion, a search for knowledge that could not be contained by conventional boundaries. In many ways, Emerson found his early education to be stifling. While his classmates excelled in rote memorization and recitations, Ralph was more inclined toward reflective thinking and introspection. He found solace in books, in the deep, quiet worlds they offered, where ideas flowed freely and without restriction. This early frustration with the traditional education system shaped Emerson's later views on the importance of self-reliance and independent thought. It was not the structured teachings of the classroom that sparked his intellectual curiosity, but the quiet moments spent in solitude, reading and reflecting on the nature of the world. During his time at Boston Latin School, Emerson began to develop his interest in the classics, particularly the works of the great philosophers and poets. He read the writings of Plato, Aristotle, and the Roman poets, finding in their words an intellectual freedom that contrasted sharply with the rigid teachings of the school. While his classmates focused on practical skills and academic success, Emerson's mind wandered toward abstract questions about the nature of the self, the universe, and human existence. In 1817, at the age of 14, Emerson entered Harvard College. Harvard at this time was a place of intellectual rigor, but it was also an institution deeply rooted in tradition and religious dogma. For many students, the college experience was one of conformity, where intellectual challenges were framed within a strictly religious context. Emerson, however, was not content to follow the traditional path. His time at Harvard was marked by an ongoing internal struggle. While he excelled in his studies, particularly in subjects like literature, history, and languages, he struggled to reconcile the demands of the institution with his growing sense of individuality and the questions that stirred within him. At Harvard, Emerson became increasingly disillusioned with the conservative and religious climate. Though he had a great respect for knowledge, he began to feel that the academic environment was limiting, reinforcing doctrines that stifled independent thinking. Emerson was by nature a deeply introspective person, and he felt that true learning came not from adherence to prescribed beliefs, but from personal exploration and intellectual freedom. His mind, though still in its early stages of development, began to seek ideas that transcended traditional boundaries. It was during his time at Harvard that Emerson also began to develop his love for nature, a love that would later become a central theme in his writing. While many of his classmates spent their free time in social pursuits or intellectual debates, Emerson found his most profound moments of clarity while walking alone in the woods and fields around Cambridge. These solitary walks provided Emerson with the space to reflect on the deeper questions of life and nature. The natural world in its quiet beauty became a place of inspiration and contemplation for him, a source of solace and insight in a world that often seemed too rigid and confining. Though Emerson's time at Harvard was filled with internal conflict and frustration, it was also a time of great intellectual growth. It was here that he began to cultivate the ideas that would later form the foundation of his philosophy. Emerson's education, though formal in structure, was ultimately self-directed, shaped by his natural curiosity and his desire to understand the world in his own way. He was not content to simply absorb the knowledge of others. He sought to question it, to challenge it, and to explore it from a new perspective. After graduating in 1821, Emerson left Harvard with a sense of quiet resolve. His academic achievements were marked by distinction, but his heart was already turning toward a different path, a path of self-discovery and intellectual independence. He had spent his youth in pursuit of knowledge, but now he was beginning to realize that true wisdom lay not in the accumulation of facts, but in the cultivation of a personal understanding of the world. Emerson's early education, both in Boston and at Harvard, set the stage for the philosophical journey that would follow. It was during these years that he first began to question the traditional views of society and religion, and to form the intellectual foundation for his later works on self-reliance, nature, and individuality. This segment marks the beginning of Emerson's intellectual independence. Though still a young man, he had already begun to shape his thoughts on the importance of individuality and self-expression. His education, though traditional in some respects, had led him to question the very nature of learning, authority, and knowledge itself. These early years of education were not simply about acquiring information. They were about discovering the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of conventional thought. After completing his education at Harvard, Ralph Waldo Emerson found himself at a crossroads in life. Despite his growing intellectual and philosophical ambitions, he chose a path that seemed to align with his upbringing. He became a minister in the Unitarian Church. In 1826, he accepted a pastoral position at the Second Church in Boston, a role that brought him both respect and security. His calling, however, would prove to be more complex and quietly conflicted than he had anticipated. Emerson's ministry was initially marked by a sense of duty. He carried out his responsibilities with conscientiousness, and his sermons were thoughtful and reflective. However, even in these early years, Emerson began to feel that the structure and dogma of organized religion were at odds with his deeper, more personal spirituality. While his public persona as a minister demanded a life of devotion and theological adherence, his private thoughts veered toward a more individualistic, less conventional understanding of the divine. In the early years of his ministry, Emerson's sermons were grounded in the traditional Unitarian faith, which emphasized reason, morality, and the importance of a personal relationship with God. But Emerson's own beliefs began to diverge from these doctrines. As he preached, he increasingly felt that the rigid frameworks of organized religion were constraining his understanding of the divine. In his private moments of reflection, he began to question the very nature of God, grace, and the afterlife. For Emerson, the divine was not confined to religious texts or church rituals. It was a living, breathing force that could be experienced in nature and in the deep recesses of the human soul. Emerson's growing discomfort with the constraints of traditional religion reached a turning point in 1832, when he faced a personal crisis that would lead to his resignation from the ministry. The catalyst for this decision was deeply personal: the death of his beloved wife, Ellen. Her passing from tuberculosis left Emerson grappling with profound grief, and the loss forced him to confront his doubts about the religious faith he had once held so dearly. Her death, while undeniably painful, catalyzed a shift in Emerson's thinking. As he grappled with the loss, Emerson began to question the efficacy of conventional religious practices in dealing with such profound emotional and spiritual pain. He found that the rituals of the church, while comforting to some, failed to provide him with the solace he so deeply needed. The experience of grief, rather than drawing him closer to his religious duties, pushed him further away, deepening his inner conflict and amplifying his sense that the institutional church could not provide the spiritual answers he sought. After much inner turmoil and reflection, Emerson made the difficult decision to resign from his position as a minister in 1832. This decision, though painful, marked a turning point in his life. He felt with a quiet certainty that his true calling lay outside the confines of institutional religion. His resignation from the ministry was not a rejection of spirituality itself, but rather a rejection of a structured, dogmatic form of worship that he no longer felt aligned with. Emerson's decision to leave the ministry was driven by a deep, personal desire for a more authentic spiritual life, a life rooted in individualism, nature, and self-reliance. In the years that followed, Emerson's spiritual journey evolved. Though he no longer served as a minister, his thoughts on the divine and the nature of religion continued to develop. He began to see spirituality as an internal, personal experience, one that could not be dictated by dogma or tradition. For Emerson, true religious experience was found in the stillness of the natural world and in the quiet contemplation of the self. In this period, Emerson's philosophy began to take shape. centered around the idea that individuals could connect with the divine through their own experiences, rather than through prescribed rituals or doctrines. In 1836, just a few years after resigning from the ministry, Emerson published his essay Nature, which articulated many of the ideas that had been brewing in his mind for years. In Nature, Emerson argued that the divine was present in all aspects of the natural world, and that individuals could achieve a direct personal connection to God through their own perceptions of nature. This essay was revolutionary for its time, offering a new spiritual vision that emphasized intuition, individuality, and the interconnectedness of all life. It was a quiet but powerful expression of Emerson's belief that true spirituality was rooted in the self and the natural world, not in external institutions. Emerson's resignation from the ministry, though it marked the end of his formal religious career, was the beginning of a new chapter in his life, a chapter in which he would fully embrace his role as a philosopher, writer, and thinker. This segment of Emerson's life is not defined by dramatic events, but by a slow and steady unravelling of his spiritual beliefs and intellectual pursuits. His journey was marked by quiet questioning, inner conflict, and a deep, personal search for truth. By leaving the ministry, Emerson opened himself up to a broader, more expansive view of spirituality, one that would shape his future writings and his enduring influence on American thought. As we move forward, we'll see how Emerson's spiritual journey continued to evolve, shaping the philosophical principles that would define him as one of America's greatest thinkers. His path, though quiet and introspective, would ultimately lead him to a profound understanding of the self, the divine, and the natural world, an understanding that continues to resonate with readers and thinkers to this day. After resigning from his ministry in 1832, Emerson embarked on a journey that would prove transformative, both personally and philosophically. He travelled to Europe, leaving behind the familiar landscapes of New England in search of intellectual growth and spiritual clarity. This journey would take him across the Atlantic from England to France, and expose him to some of the most profound thinkers and cultural movements of the time. It was during his travels in Europe that Emerson encountered new ideas and perspectives that would greatly influence his developing philosophy. He visited England first, where he met a range of influential figures, including the poets Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth. These meetings would leave an indelible mark on Emerson's thinking, particularly in regard to his ideas on nature, the self, and the divine. In Coleridge, Emerson found a kindred spirit, a thinker who shared his deep interest in the human soul and the relationship between the individual and the universe. Coleridge's philosophical insights on the nature of imagination and the transcendence of human experience resonated deeply with Emerson, who was beginning to view the world through a lens of spiritual and intellectual self-reliance. The ideas Emerson encountered in Coleridge's works would influence his own writing, particularly in his essays on self-reliance and the relationship between the self and the divine. Similarly, Emerson's meeting with Wordsworth left a lasting impression. The English poet's deep connection to nature and his belief in the divinity present in the natural world mirrored Emerson's own views, which were beginning to take shape at this time. For Emerson, Wordsworth's poetry offered a profound connection to nature that transcended mere beauty. It was, in Wordsworth's words, a means of reaching the soul. This concept of nature as a living, breathing force connected to the divine became a central theme in Emerson's own philosophy. In addition to his meetings with these intellectuals, Emerson also had the opportunity to experience firsthand the culture and beauty of Europe. He visited the great cathedrals and museums, which offered a striking contrast to the more understated simplicity of New England. While he appreciated the history and grandeur of these places, he was also struck by a sense of the limitations of European tradition. Emerson's thoughts on individuality and self-reliance began to crystallize during this time, as he found himself more drawn to the quiet, humble beauty of nature than to the imposing structures of human-made institutions. Emerson's travels were not simply about meeting other thinkers or experiencing new places, they were a form of self-discovery. The journey allowed him to step outside of the confines of New England and see the world through fresh eyes. His experiences in Europe deepened his understanding of the individual's role in the world, as well as the connection between humanity and nature. By the time he returned to America in 1833, Emerson had undergone a profound transformation. Although Emerson's time in Europe was relatively short, it left a lasting imprint on his thinking. Upon his return to Concord, he began to refine his ideas on the nature of the self and the divine, further developing the philosophical framework that would become the hallmark of his transcendentalist philosophy. The ideas of self-reliance, intuition, and the divine presence in nature, which would later define his writing, were all shaped by his experiences abroad. The European journey also marked a key moment in Emerson's spiritual development. He had left America in search of intellectual growth, but the journey allowed him to discover something deeper, an understanding of the interconnectedness of all things and the importance of trusting one's inner voice. In Europe, he saw firsthand the way in which the human spirit could transcend societal and religious boundaries, and he began to fully embrace the idea that true spiritual enlightenment came from within. Upon his return to America, Emerson was changed. His philosophical ideas were now fully formed, and he was ready to share them with the world. His reflections on self-reliance, nature, and the divine began to take shape in his writing, and he soon became a central figure in the Transcendentalist movement, a philosophical and literary movement that emphasized the importance of the individual, the power of intuition, and the connection between humanity and the natural world. This segment marks the turning point in Emerson's life. His journey to Europe, though physically brief, catalyzed a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. It was in Europe that Emerson's ideas truly began to take root, and it was in this period that he began to fully embrace the philosophical and spiritual beliefs that would define his life's work. The journey abroad was not simply a physical one, it was a spiritual and intellectual journey that helped Emerson shape the philosophy that would later influence generations of thinkers and writers. As Emerson returned to America, he carried with him a new sense of purpose and clarity. He was no longer just a young man with questions about the world. He had now found some of the answers. The intellectual freedom he had sought in Europe had revealed to him the importance of self-reliance, the divine presence in nature, and the need to trust one's inner voice. These ideas would guide him for the rest of his life, shaping both his writing and his legacy. Upon his return to America in 1833, Ralph Waldo Emerson found himself in a quiet period of transition. The experiences of his European journey had left a deep imprint on his thinking, and he returned to the familiar landscape of Concord, Massachusetts, where he would begin to carve out a new intellectual life for himself. While his journey abroad had helped him refine his ideas on spirituality, nature, and the self, it was in Concord that Emerson began to put these ideas into words and shape them into the philosophy that would later define his legacy. Concord, with its pastoral beauty and quiet rhythms, was the perfect setting for Emerson's intellectual development. The small New England town was far removed from the hustle and bustle of larger cities, and it provided Emerson with the solitude and reflection necessary for his deep philosophical musings. His home in Concord became the backdrop for much of his writing and thinking, a sanctuary where his thoughts could unfold at their own pace. In many ways, this period of Emerson's life was one of quiet consolidation, a time for him to organize his reflections and begin to articulate the philosophical and spiritual beliefs he'd begun to form. In 1836, just a few years after his return, Emerson published his first major work, Nature. This essay would become the cornerstone of his philosophy, encapsulating many of the ideas he'd been quietly developing since his time in Europe. In Nature, Emerson argued that the divine could be found in the natural world, and that individuals could connect with this divine presence through their own experiences and perceptions. The essay expressed Emerson's belief in the importance of self-reliance, intuition, and the direct experience of the world, and it served as a profound rejection of traditional religious dogma. In Nature, Emerson famously wrote, "The happiest man is he who learns from nature the lesson of worship. His belief that nature was a living, breathing reflection of the divine became central to his philosophy. For Emerson, the natural world was not just a backdrop for human life. It was a manifestation of spiritual truth, waiting to be discovered by those who were open to its lessons. This idea of the sacredness of nature was revolutionary at the time, offering a new, more personal path to spiritual enlightenment, one that didn't rely on established religious institutions, but rather on the individual's direct connection to the world around them. At the time of its publication, nature did not immediately gain widespread attention, but it marked the beginning of Emerson's rise as a central figure in the intellectual circles of New England. The essay was reflective, calm, and contemplative in tone, much like Emerson himself. It did not call for revolution or radical change, but instead it offered a quiet, introspective vision of a new spiritual path, a path that was rooted in nature, self-reliance, and the inner voice. Though nature was not an instant commercial success, it began to attract a small but dedicated group of readers, many of whom were inspired by its message. Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance and individuality began to take hold, particularly within the emerging transcendentalist movement. This group of thinkers, writers, and reformers was drawn to Emerson's rejection of traditional authority and his emphasis on personal intuition and direct experience. Among his early followers were Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, and Bronson Alcott, all of whom would go on to make significant contributions to American thought and literature. Emerson's influence began to grow steadily as he became more involved in the Transcendentalist Club, a group dedicated to exploring the ideas he had laid out in nature. These gatherings, held in Concord and attended by Emerson and his intellectual peers, provided a space for the exchange of ideas about literature, philosophy, and spirituality. The Transcendentalists, though varied in their beliefs, shared a common conviction that the individual was the highest authority and that true spiritual insight came from within. Emerson's voice became a guiding force in this intellectual movement, and he began to gain recognition as one of the most important American philosophers of his time. As Emerson's influence grew, so did his commitment to the idea of self-reliance. He began to give public lectures, which further expanded his reach. His speaking engagements were calm, contemplative affairs, with Emerson delivering his ideas in a measured, thoughtful manner. He did not seek to stir up controversy or incite action. His aim was simply to share his vision of a world where individuals were free to trust their own instincts, rely on their own judgment, and find meaning in the natural world. Despite his growing influence, Emerson remained deeply introspective. He was never one to seek fame or public acclaim. His primary concern was always with the quiet unfolding of his thoughts and ideas. His public lectures, while widely attended, were more about creating a space for reflection than about drawing attention to himself. Emerson's deep commitment to intellectual integrity and spiritual authenticity meant that he was never content to simply repeat conventional wisdom. Instead, he sought to explore and articulate his own, often unconventional, vision of truth. During this time in Concord, Emerson also began to write a series of essays that would further solidify his philosophical reputation. Essays such as Self-Reliance, 1841, and The Oversoul, 1841, expanded on the themes he had introduced in nature, diving deeper into the nature of individuality, the importance of intuition, and the interconnectedness of all life. These works, along with nature, formed the backbone of Emerson's philosophy, which would continue to inspire thinkers for generations to come. In the years following the publication of Nature, Emerson's life in Concord was marked by a steady flow of intellectual activity. His writing, speaking, and participation in the Transcendentalist movement established him as a central figure in the intellectual life of 19th century America. Yet through it all, Emerson remained grounded in the quiet rhythm of life in Concord, walking the woods, reflecting on the ideas that shaped his worldview, and remaining deeply connected to the natural world. In 1841, Ralph Waldo Emerson published Self-Reliance, an essay that would become one of his most famous and widely read works. This essay, with its powerful message about the importance of individualism and personal integrity, marked a defining moment in Emerson's life and thought. In Self-Reliance, Emerson called upon readers to trust their own instincts, to resist conformity, and to embrace the divinely inspired wisdom that resided within each person. The essay became the clarion call for an intellectual movement that rejected the traditional constraints of society and religion in favor of personal growth and self-expression. At the heart of self-reliance is the idea that the individual must be self-sufficient in both thought and action. Emerson writes that each person carries a unique perspective and a unique connection to the divine, and that true wisdom comes from within. He urges his readers to trust their inner voice, to follow their instincts, and to live authentically, regardless of society's expectations. "Trust thyself," he declares in one of the most famous lines of the essay. "Every heart vibrates to that iron string." This declaration became the essence of Emerson's philosophy and a guiding principle for generations of thinkers who followed him. For Emerson, self-reliance was not merely a matter of independence or self-sufficiency in the material sense. It was about mental and spiritual autonomy. He believed that each person had the ability to perceive truth and to make decisions based on their own understanding, rather than relying on external authorities. In this sense, self-reliance was a call for liberation, not just from physical dependence on others, but from the intellectual and spiritual limitations imposed by society. Emerson encouraged readers to break free from the pressures of convention, to embrace their unique individuality, and to find their own path in life. The essay also emphasized the importance of self-expression. Emerson believed that each person was a unique reflection of the divine, and that it was the duty of every individual to express their thoughts, creativity, and personal truths. By doing so, they would contribute to the greater good of humanity. "What I've heard of the morning is but the beginning of a conversation," Emerson wrote. "It is the same with the human soul, which speaks to itself, and the thought which it speaks is true, yet it is a fragment only." Though the message of self-reliance was one of empowerment and encouragement, it was also one that called for courage. To follow one's inner voice and to live authentically was no easy task. It required a certain boldness. Emerson recognized the difficulty of standing apart from the crowd, of resisting the pressures to conform to societal norms and expectations. Yet he believed that the rewards of living a life of self-reliance far outweighed the challenges. A life lived in accordance with one's true self, Emerson argued, was the only life worth living. "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself," he wrote. "Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles." The publication of Self-Reliance marked a significant moment in Emerson's rise to intellectual prominence. Though the essay was not an immediate commercial success, it gained increasing attention and respect over time. It resonated deeply with those who were seeking an alternative to the rigid and often oppressive structures of society and religion. The essay's message of individuality and self-trust struck a chord with those who longed for a deeper connection to themselves and the world around them. In the years that followed, Emerson's influence as a writer and thinker grew steadily. His lectures and essays were widely read and admired, and he became a leading voice in the intellectual circles of New England. Self-Reliance became the central text for the Transcendentalist movement, a group of writers and thinkers who shared Emerson's belief in the importance of personal intuition, the sanctity of nature, and the divine presence within each individual. Henry David Thoreau, one of Emerson's closest disciples, wrote in his own work about the value of self-reliance, building upon the ideas Emerson had articulated so powerfully. The essay's influence extended far beyond the Transcendentalists, however. Self-reliance resonated with those who were seeking social reform, personal freedom, and a deeper understanding of the spiritual life. It also found a place within the broader intellectual currents of the time, contributing to a growing movement of philosophical and literary exploration that sought to break free from the constraints of the past and to embrace new ways of thinking about the self and its place in the world. In the years that followed the publication of Self-Reliance, Emerson's ideas continued to evolve. He refined his thinking on self-reliance and individuality, expanding upon these themes in later essays such as The Oversoul, 1841, and The Conduct of Life, 1860. But the message of self-reliance remained at the heart of his work. It was a message that resonated deeply with readers, offering a vision of a life that was free, independent, and deeply connected to the divine. By the time of his death in 1882, Emerson had left an indelible mark on American intellectual life. His philosophy of self-reliance, his belief in the power of nature, and his commitment to the inner voice had shaped a generation of thinkers, writers, and social reformers. Yet despite the breadth of his influence, Emerson remained a deeply private person, quietly devoted to the pursuit of truth and self-expression. The 1840s marked a period of intellectual flourishing for Ralph Waldo Emerson. After the publication of his influential essays, including Self-Reliance, and his rising recognition as a central figure in American thought, Emerson found himself at the heart of a philosophical and literary movement that would reshape the cultural landscape of New England transcendentalism. In Concord, where Emerson had settled, he gathered with like-minded individuals to form the Transcendental Club in the early 1830s. The group met regularly to discuss ideas about spirituality, literature, and the philosophy of individualism. The Transcendentalists, while diverse in their views, shared a common belief in the inherent goodness of both people and nature. They also advocated for the primacy of intuition and personal experience over institutional doctrine and rigid social structures. The Transcendentalist movement was grounded in the conviction that individuals were capable of direct personal knowledge of the divine through their own experiences with nature. For Emerson, this was a central tenet of his philosophy. The idea that each person could find truth within themselves, that the answers to life's deepest questions were accessible through quiet reflection and communion with the natural world. As he once wrote, "In the woods, we return to reason and faith." The Transcendental Club provided Emerson with an intellectual community that supported and reinforced his ideas. Among the members were key figures such as Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Bronson Alcott, and Elizabeth Peabody. Each of these thinkers contributed their own perspectives to the Transcendentalist movement, but they were united in their respect for Emerson's leadership and the direction he set for the group. Henry David Thoreau, perhaps Emerson's most famous disciple, was profoundly influenced by Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance and his belief in the sanctity of nature. Thoreau's own writings, including Walden and Civil Disobedience, are deeply rooted in the principles Emerson espoused. Thoreau's time at Walden Pond, living simply and in close communion with nature, was a direct embodiment of Emerson's ideas. The bond between Emerson and Thoreau was close, with Emerson acting as a mentor to the younger man, encouraging his intellectual and spiritual development. Margaret Fuller, a journalist, philosopher, and women's rights advocate, also played a key role in the Transcendentalist movement. Her writings on the roles of women in society and her advocacy for gender equality were informed by the same transcendental ideas that shaped Emerson's work. Fuller's book, Woman in the 19th Century, became one of the seminal texts of feminist thought in America, grounded in the belief that women too could achieve self-reliance and personal empowerment. The Transcendentalists were not just concerned with philosophical exploration, they were also interested in social reform. Many of the members, including Emerson, were deeply involved in the abolitionist movement, advocating for the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. The movement's commitment to individual rights and self-expression naturally extended to a concern for social justice, and Emerson's voice was a steady one in calling for freedom and equality. Though his views were often more moderate compared to more radical abolitionists, he still played a significant role in promoting the moral imperative of ending slavery. The club meetings in Concord became a space for intellectual and philosophical exchange, where Emerson and his peers could explore ideas that challenged traditional norms. These meetings were not raucous debates, but quiet, reflective gatherings where ideas flowed gently and everyone's thoughts were considered with respect. The atmosphere was one of intellectual curiosity, where new ideas could take root in the fertile soil of open discussion. The influence of the Transcendentalists extended beyond the confines of Concord, reaching into the broader intellectual circles of the United States and Europe. Emerson's own writings, inspired by the club's ideas, became widely read and respected, and the principles of Transcendentalism began to take hold in American literature, education, and even politics. The movement, while never a formalized institution, became a powerful force in shaping American culture. For Emerson, the Transcendentalist period was one of both personal and intellectual growth. He found in the club a sense of solidarity with other thinkers who were equally committed to the pursuit of truth and individuality. It was a time of creative exchange, where his ideas could be tested, refined, and expanded upon by his peers. And it was also a time of deep reflection, as Emerson continued to develop his own philosophy of self-reliance, intuition, and nature. As the 1840s progressed, Emerson's stature as a philosopher and public intellectual grew. His works were read widely, and his lectures were in high demand. Yet despite his increasing prominence, Emerson remained the same quiet, reflective thinker who had first walked the woods of Concord in search of answers. His philosophy, though gaining influence, remained grounded in the personal, intimate search for truth that had defined his early life. The Transcendentalist movement, with Emerson at its center, helped to shape the intellectual climate of 19th century America, fostering a new wave of thought that would continue to resonate in the works of future generations of writers, philosophers, and reformers. Emerson's leadership in the movement, both through his writing and his intellectual gatherings, played a key role in defining the American philosophical tradition. In 1850, Ralph Waldo Emerson published Representative Men, a work that would deepen his philosophical exploration into the nature of human greatness and the qualities that define exceptional individuals. The book is a collection of essays in which Emerson reflects on historical figures who embodied qualities of leadership, wisdom, and virtue. In this work, he sought to understand what made these figures stand out from the ordinary, and how their lives contributed to the greater good of humanity. Emerson's focus in Representative Men was not simply on the accomplishments of these individuals, but on the inner qualities that drove them to achieve greatness. He believed that true greatness came not from outward success, but from an inner connection to the divine and to one's highest self. In this sense, Representative Men was a continuation of the ideas Emerson had explored in his earlier works, particularly in self-reliance and nature. However, Representative Men expanded his exploration to include an analysis of how these ideals manifested in the lives of others, men who had, in their own unique ways, embodied the transcendental virtues Emerson had championed. The book contains essays on a variety of historical figures, including Plato, Shakespeare, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Each essay is a meditation on the individual's life, achievements, and the qualities that made them stand out as representatives of the best qualities of humanity. Emerson did not simply admire these men for their external successes or their historical significance, but for the deeper, more universal qualities they embodied, qualities that connected them to something greater than themselves. One of the key themes in Representative Men is Emerson's belief that greatness is not defined by fame or wealth, but by a person's ability to tap into their inner vision and to express their unique perspective on the world. For Emerson, each individual has the potential to become a representative man, someone who, through self-reliance and intuitive understanding, can contribute something profound to the world. In examining the lives of figures such as Plato, Emerson sought to reveal the inner workings of their genius, how their thoughts, ideas, and actions were guided by an inner compass that transcended conventional norms. Emerson's essay on Plato, for example, focuses not just on the philosopher's contributions to Western thought, but on his deep spiritual connection to the truth. He believed that Plato's genius came from his ability to intuitively grasp the eternal forms, the underlying principles that govern reality. In a similar vein, Emerson's essay on Shakespeare explores the playwright's ability to channel the full range of human emotion and experience into his work, and his ability to capture the universal aspects of the human condition. In his essay on Napoleon Bonaparte, Emerson examines the idea of leadership, considering how Napoleon's genius was not just in his military strategy, but in his ability to embody the spirit of the age and to inspire others to follow his vision. Napoleon, for Emerson, was a man who embodied the transcendental ideal of the self-reliant individual, a person who shaped the course of history not through conformity, but through his bold vision and unshakable confidence in his own abilities. Throughout Representative Men, Emerson encourages his readers to see greatness not as something distant or unattainable, but as something that resides within all of us, waiting to be realized. By examining the lives of these great individuals, Emerson sought to inspire others to tap into their own potential for greatness. He believed that the same qualities that made these men exceptional, courage, self-reliance, and an unwavering connection to their own inner truths, were accessible to anyone who was willing to look within and trust their own instincts. The publication of Representative Men marked a significant moment in Emerson's intellectual development. It was a work that combined his deep reverence for nature and the self with his growing interest in human history and the study of great individuals. In this sense, Representative Men was both a philosophical treatise and a spiritual exploration, a way for Emerson to further define the characteristics that he believed were essential to true greatness. Though Representative Men was not as widely popular as some of Emerson's earlier works, it contributed to his growing reputation as one of the leading intellectual figures in 19th century America. The book helped to solidify his place within the broader intellectual currents of the time, as well as within the Transcendentalist movement. However, as with all of his work, Emerson's focus remained not on fame or recognition, but on the quiet unfolding of his ideas, expressed with careful deliberation and a steady commitment to intellectual and spiritual growth. In the years that followed the publication of Representative Men, Emerson's ideas continued to evolve, and he would go on to write more essays, deliver more lectures, and influence the lives of many thinkers and writers. Yet Representative Men remained one of his key works, a reflection on what it meant to be human, to be truly self-reliant, and to live a life that was connected to the greater truths of the universe. The book also reflects Emerson's ongoing exploration of human nature and his deep belief in the possibility of transcendent individual greatness. In 1842, Ralph Waldo Emerson faced one of the most profound and devastating experiences of his life, the death of his young son, Waldo, from scarlet fever. Waldo, who had been a bright and energetic child, was just 5 years old when he passed away. The loss struck Emerson deeply, and it marked a turning point in his intellectual and spiritual life. While his earlier works had touched on themes of self-reliance, nature, and the divine, the death of his son forced him to confront the deeper questions of life and death, suffering, and the nature of existence. Though Emerson had always been a reflective and introspective person, the loss of Waldo brought his grief to the forefront, and his thoughts on mortality grew more urgent. His philosophy of self-reliance, which had emphasized the importance of trusting the inner voice and finding strength within, was now tested in the face of such an overwhelming personal tragedy. Emerson's understanding of the human condition, which had once been shaped by his intellectual exploration and spiritual inquiry, was now profoundly affected by the raw emotional experience of losing a loved one. In the wake of Waldo's death, Emerson turned inward, seeking solace in the natural world that had always been a source of inspiration and comfort. As he walked through the fields and woods near his home in Concord, he found that nature provided a quiet refuge from his grief. For Emerson, the natural world remained a place of spiritual connection, a reminder of the interconnectedness of all life, and a source of calm in the face of human suffering. Emerson's reflections on death and suffering in the years following Waldo's death were marked by a quiet acceptance, though not without pain. He began to see death not as an end, but as a transition, part of the natural cycle of life. This perspective did not diminish his grief, but it allowed him to view death with a sense of philosophical clarity. He came to believe that death was a necessary part of existence, a part of the greater rhythm of life that included both birth and death, joy and sorrow. In his writing and lectures after Waldo's death, Emerson explored the themes of mortality and the human spirit with a newfound depth. His essay Compensation, 1841, which had been written before Waldo's death, took on new meaning in the wake of the loss. In this essay, Emerson discusses the idea that every loss is balanced by a corresponding gain, that suffering and joy are intertwined, and that every experience, whether joyful or painful, is part of the broader cosmic balance. Emerson wrote, "The great and general law of compensation is that in nature it is all the same whether the conditions be called good or bad." Emerson's thoughts on compensation were not simply theoretical, they were deeply personal. He grappled with the loss of his son by examining how suffering and death could be reconciled with the larger picture of existence. His reflections were marked by a sense of peace, though not an easy peace, and a quiet acceptance of the inevitability of death as a natural part of the human experience. The grief Emerson experienced with Waldo's death also led him to reconsider his beliefs about the afterlife. While Emerson had never been a devout believer in traditional religious doctrines, he now began to see death in a more spiritual light. He came to believe that the spirit of a person could continue to exist in some form after death, not necessarily in a literal individual sense, but as a part of the larger eternal flow of life. In this way, Emerson reconciled the pain of loss with his belief in the continuity of the human spirit, which, in his view, was connected to the divine and to the broader, eternal forces of the universe. Despite the deep sorrow that marked this period of his life, Emerson's reflections on death and suffering were not filled with despair. Instead, he found a kind of quiet strength in the recognition that life and death were part of the same cycle, and that even in the face of personal tragedy, there was a greater meaning and order to existence. Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance, which had once focused on the power of the individual, now expanded to encompass a broader understanding of the human condition, one that acknowledged both the inevitability of suffering and the possibility of transcendence. The loss of Waldo did not, in the end, diminish Emerson's faith in the power of nature and the divine. Instead, it deepened his connection to these forces as he came to see them not only as sources of beauty and inspiration, but as sources of solace and understanding in the face of life's most painful experiences. Through his grief, Emerson's philosophy matured as he embraced a more holistic view of existence, one that included both the joy and sorrow of being human. This period of quiet reflection after Waldo's death marked a new phase in Emerson's intellectual and spiritual life. His ideas about self-reliance, nature, and the divine became more integrated with the realities of human suffering, and his understanding of the human spirit grew more compassionate and expansive. Though his personal loss was profound, Emerson's response to it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of reflective thought to bring peace even in the darkest of times. The 1850s and 1860s were marked by both personal and national turmoil in America. For Ralph Waldo Emerson, this period was one of deep intellectual and moral reflection, particularly as the country grappled with the issue of slavery and its eventual secession into the Civil War. Although Emerson's early philosophical works were focused on self-reliance, nature, and individuality, his later writings began to address more directly the pressing social issues of his time. As the country stood on the precipice of civil war, Emerson's voice was one of moral clarity, calling for individual action, justice, and a deeper understanding of the nature of freedom. By the time the Civil War began in 1861, Emerson was already a well-established figure in American intellectual life. His lectures and essays had inspired generations of thinkers and reformers, and his influence had spread far beyond the confines of Concord, Massachusetts. However, the advent of war forced Emerson to engage more directly with the moral and political issues that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface of his work. Emerson's reflections on slavery, individual liberty, and the rights of African Americans began to take a more prominent place in his thought during this period. Emerson had long been an abolitionist, a vocal critic of slavery, and an advocate for the rights of African Americans. His essay, The Fugitive Slave Law, 1851, written in response to the controversial Fugitive Slave Act, had already signalled his strong opposition to the institution of slavery. In this essay, Emerson argued that the laws of man, which allowed for the capture and return of runaway slaves, were in direct conflict with the higher moral laws of nature and justice. For Emerson, the cause of abolition was not simply a political or legal matter. It was a moral imperative that transcended the boundaries of politics and society. Throughout the 1850s and into the early years of the Civil War, Emerson continued to speak out against slavery, using his platform as a public intellectual to urge his fellow Americans to confront the moral failings of their society. His opposition to slavery was grounded not only in humanitarian concerns, but in his transcendental belief in the intrinsic worth and dignity of every individual. Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance extended to his views on civil rights, as he believed that all individuals, regardless of race, were entitled to the same liberties and freedoms that he espoused in his writings. Despite the war's upheaval, Emerson's commitment to the ideals of self-reliance and individual liberty remained steadfast. He saw the war as a necessary struggle for freedom, though he was deeply troubled by the violence and destruction that came with it. In his journals and public lectures, Emerson often reflected on the moral costs of war and the complexities of the human spirit. He expressed a desire for peace, but recognized that sometimes justice could only be achieved through conflict. The war, in Emerson's eyes, was not only a battle for the preservation of the Union, but a battle for the soul of America, a struggle to eradicate the moral stain of slavery from the fabric of the nation. Emerson's lectures during the Civil War period were marked by a quiet but resolute call to action. He urged his audience to engage in the moral work of the nation, to contribute to the cause of abolition, and to seek a deeper understanding of the principles of liberty and justice. His speeches were not filled with fiery rhetoric or appeals to emotion. Instead, they offered a calm, reasoned reflection on the moral responsibility of individuals in the face of social injustice. He believed that the war, though painful, was a necessary step toward the greater good, and that it was a time for individuals to reflect on their own roles in creating a more just society. As the war continued, Emerson's thoughts on freedom, equality, and the nature of democracy deepened. He increasingly saw the struggle for abolition as part of a larger global movement for human rights and liberty. Emerson's belief in the power of the individual, his commitment to personal integrity, and his transcendental philosophy all contributed to his understanding of the war as not just a national crisis but a universal moral struggle. In 1863, Emerson wrote a series of lectures on the theme of man and the world. These lectures addressed the challenges and opportunities that individuals face when engaging with the larger world, particularly in the context of social and political struggles. For Emerson, the war was a reflection of the larger battle for human freedom that had been fought throughout history. He saw the abolition of slavery as a fundamental part of the ongoing struggle for justice and freedom, and he urged his listeners to reflect on their own roles in this larger movement for human rights. As the war neared its conclusion, Emerson's thoughts on the nature of freedom and democracy continued to evolve. He wrote in his journals, "The great reformers are those who seek to remove the obstacles that prevent the full realization of human freedom." For Emerson, the work of the abolitionists and the sacrifices made during the war were part of the larger effort to free individuals from the chains of oppression and to create a society that reflected the moral ideals of liberty and equality. By the end of the Civil War in 1865, Emerson had emerged as one of the key moral voices of his time, a champion of individual freedom, civil rights, and social justice. His reflections on the war and his involvement in the abolitionist movement had deepened his understanding of the connection between personal integrity and societal progress. Though he had never been a revolutionary in the traditional sense, Emerson's philosophical writings and public speeches played a crucial role in shaping the intellectual and moral landscape of America during a time of profound social upheaval. As the years passed, Ralph Waldo Emerson entered into the later stages of his life, a period marked by continued intellectual productivity, personal loss, and a growing awareness of his own mortality. Though he continued to write and lecture well into his 70s, the themes of aging, death, and the passage of time began to occupy a more prominent place in his thoughts. In his final decades, Emerson's reflections on the human experience deepened as he grappled with the inevitable march of time and the quiet acceptance of life's impermanence. During the 1860s and 1870s, Emerson's health began to decline. Though he had always been a man of energetic intellect, the physical vitality that had characterized his earlier years was slowly fading. Emerson was no longer the robust, active figure he had once been, and his health struggles became a subtle undercurrent in his life and work. However, even in the face of his declining health, Emerson remained mentally sharp, continuing to write essays, deliver lectures, and engage in philosophical reflection. In the years leading up to his death, Emerson's writing and public speaking began to slow, but he remained a respected figure within the intellectual community. His lectures, once a central part of his public life, were now fewer in number, and he often delivered them with the quiet deliberation that had marked much of his later work. His thoughts on self-reliance, nature, and the human spirit had already been well established, and now, in the twilight of his life, he continued to refine and deepen these ideas, particularly in relation to the cycle of life and death. The loss of his son Waldo in 1842 had already made death a central theme in Emerson's work, but as he aged, Emerson found himself reflecting more directly on his own mortality. He recognized that the human experience was a temporary one, that each person's life was marked by both the beauty and the fragility of existence. Yet, despite this awareness, Emerson did not view death with despair. His reflections on mortality were marked by a quiet acceptance and a continued belief in the interconnectedness of all life. In his journals, Emerson often wrote about the passage of time and the inevitability of death, but he also emphasized the importance of living fully in the present moment. He wrote, "The great end of life is not knowledge, but action." Even in the face of his own aging, Emerson continued to hold firm to his belief in the power of the individual to shape their own life. Though he acknowledged that life was fleeting, he urged himself and others to live authentically, with purpose and passion, until the very end. Emerson's later years also saw a deepening of his spiritual thoughts. While he had always held a non-traditional view of the divine, Emerson's aging years brought him closer to a quiet sense of inner peace. His belief in the presence of the divine in nature and in the individual's ability to connect with this divine presence remained at the core of his philosophy. In his reflections on mortality, Emerson found solace in the idea that the spirit of the individual is eternal, part of a greater universal force that transcends the physical body. Death, for Emerson, was not an end but a transition, a return to the larger flow of life. In his later writings, Emerson also focused on the idea of the oversoul, a concept he had developed earlier in his work, which referred to the divine essence that connects all beings. For Emerson, the oversoul represented the interconnectedness of all life, and he believed that each individual's consciousness was a part of this greater spiritual force. As he faced the end of his own life, Emerson found comfort in this idea, believing that death was simply a return to the universal life force from which all beings arise. The 1880s brought increasing physical frailty, and Emerson's public life gradually faded. Yet, even as his body grew weaker, his philosophical voice remained steady. His final years were spent largely in the solitude of his home in Concord, where he continued to reflect on the larger questions of life, death, and the nature of existence. His mind remained sharp, and he continued to write until shortly before his death. Though his work was now more introspective and focused on themes of transcendence and spiritual continuity, Emerson's death on April 27, 1882, marked the end of an era. He had lived a life devoted to the pursuit of truth, the celebration of individuality, and the exploration of the divine presence in nature. Though he had faced the personal grief of losing loved ones and the inevitability of his own aging, Emerson remained committed to his philosophy of self-reliance and individual autonomy. His final reflections on life and death were marked by the same quiet confidence that had defined his earlier years, a belief in the power of the individual spirit and the eternal connection between all living things. As Ralph Waldo Emerson entered the final decade of his life, he continued to be a significant intellectual figure, though his health had begun to decline. Despite the increasing frailty of his body, Emerson's mind remained sharp, and his reflections on life, death, and the future of human thought remained a constant presence. By the 1880s, Emerson had firmly established himself as one of the most influential thinkers of the 19th century, and his legacy was already beginning to take shape. His writings, his philosophy, and his impact on American intellectual life had already left an indelible mark on the generations that had followed him. Although his physical presence was no longer as prominent as it had been in his younger years, Emerson's intellectual influence continued to expand. His work had inspired countless writers, thinkers, and reformers, and his philosophy of self-reliance, individualism, and the divine presence in nature continued to resonate with those who sought a deeper understanding of human existence. Emerson's ideas about the interconnectedness of all life, the importance of trusting one's inner voice, and the role of the individual in shaping the world were all central to the intellectual movements of the time. One of the key ways in which Emerson's influence persisted was through his connection to the emerging American literary and philosophical traditions. His transcendental philosophy, which emphasized the importance of nature, self-reliance, and intuition, had paved the way for writers like Henry David Thoreau and Walt Whitman, both of whom expanded upon and refined Emerson's ideas. Thoreau, with his exploration of simple living at Walden Pond, exemplified Emerson's ideal of a life lived in harmony with nature and guided by personal reflection. Whitman, whose poetry celebrated the individual and the collective spirit, drew heavily on Emerson's belief in the divinity of each person and the power of self-expression. Emerson's influence also extended beyond literature and philosophy. His advocacy for social reform, particularly in the areas of abolitionism and women's rights, had made him an important figure in the intellectual and political movements of his time. His lectures on freedom, democracy, and justice had shaped the thoughts of many of his contemporaries, and his reflections on the moral dimensions of human progress continued to guide those who sought to build a more just and equitable society. Emerson's belief in the importance of individual rights and the sanctity of the self resonated deeply with the social and political movements that sought to address inequality and promote civil liberties. In the 1880s, Emerson's name had become synonymous with the intellectual and spiritual awakening that had defined the Transcendentalist movement. His work was now being read and studied not only in America but also in Europe, where many intellectuals saw Emerson as a key figure in the development of modern thought. His ideas about the relationship between the individual and society, the role of nature in spiritual life, and the importance of self-expression had found a global audience, and Emerson's reputation as a leading philosopher of the age was firmly established. As Emerson approached the final years of his life, he remained somewhat removed from the public eye. His declining health prevented him from travelling as he once had, and his lectures became less frequent. Yet, even in the quiet of his home in Concord, Emerson's mind remained active. He continued to write in his journals, reflecting on the themes that had occupied him for most of his life: the nature of the self, the divine presence in the world, and the connection between human beings and the larger universe. His thoughts in these final years were more introspective, focused on the nature of existence and the quiet, inevitable passage of time. In his journals, Emerson wrote often about the idea of immortality, which had been a central theme in his life and work. Though he did not hold to the conventional religious understanding of an afterlife, he continued to believe in the continuity of the human spirit, seeing death not as an end but as a transition to something larger. For Emerson, the spirit was eternal, part of a greater cosmic force that transcended the limitations of the physical body. His reflections on immortality were grounded in his earlier writings on the Oversoul, the divine essence that connected all living beings. In his final years, Emerson continued to express his belief in this larger spiritual unity, finding comfort in the idea that death was simply a return to the greater flow of life. As Emerson's health continued to decline, his public appearances grew rarer, yet his intellectual legacy continued to grow. By the time of his death in 1882, Emerson had become one of the most significant figures in American intellectual history. His philosophy of self-reliance, his emphasis on individuality and personal intuition, and his deep reverence for nature had helped shape the intellectual foundations of modern America. Even after his passing, Emerson's work continued to influence generations of thinkers and writers. His writings on individualism and the divine had a profound impact on later intellectual movements, including existentialism and humanism. His emphasis on the power of the individual and the importance of personal experience resonated deeply with the growing movements for civil rights and social justice in the 20th century. Emerson's influence, while rooted in his own time, continued to echo across the generations. His life and work, marked by a steady devotion to truth, personal integrity, and spiritual exploration, remain a beacon for those seeking to understand the deeper aspects of human existence. By the time Ralph Waldo Emerson entered the 1870s, his life was increasingly defined by a sense of quiet reflection. Though his health had begun to deteriorate, he remained intellectually engaged, his mind still sharp, and his philosophical outlook as steady as ever. In these final years, Emerson continued to refine and express his ideas, though in a more intimate, introspective way. His days of public lectures were largely behind him, but his writings, particularly his journals, remained a testament to the ongoing depth of his thought. As Emerson aged, he continued to grapple with the central themes of his life's work: the nature of the self, the divine presence in the world, and the individual's role in the broader cosmic order. His reflections on aging, death, and the continuity of the spirit deepened in these years, as he turned his attention inward and sought to understand his place in the grand, ever-evolving flow of life. His earlier works on self-reliance and nature had established the foundations of his philosophy, but his final years were marked by a more serene, reflective approach to these themes. Despite his physical frailty, Emerson maintained a sense of clarity about his intellectual legacy. He had already achieved a level of recognition that few intellectuals could hope for in their lifetimes, and his influence continued to grow even as his body weakened. Emerson's ideas had permeated the intellectual and cultural landscape of America, and his role as a leader in the transcendentalist movement had left a lasting mark on American philosophy and literature. But as his health declined, Emerson's thoughts turned increasingly to the larger question of legacy. He was keenly aware that time was running out for him, and that his contributions to American intellectual life would outlast him. Yet, despite his growing sense of mortality, Emerson remained focused on the present moment. He continued to write, reflect, and connect with his philosophical ideals, even as he came to terms with the inevitable passage of time. Emerson's last years were marked by a quiet acceptance of the natural course of life. He had already weathered personal losses, including the death of his son Waldo in 1842, and had lived through the national turmoil of the Civil War and the social upheaval that followed. His reflections on these events, and on the nature of suffering and resilience, remained consistent with his earlier thoughts on the interconnectedness of life and the importance of spiritual growth. In the final year of his life, Emerson's health had deteriorated significantly. His mental clarity, however, remained intact, and he continued to write in his journals, meditating on the themes of mortality, the soul, and the divine. He remained connected to the core ideas that had guided his entire life: the importance of trusting the self, the power of nature as a reflection of divine truth, and the recognition that each individual had the capacity to contribute to the greater good of humanity. In these final years, Emerson also reflected on the changing world around him. The Industrial Revolution, the rise of new social movements, and the ongoing struggles for freedom and equality All provided him with opportunities to consider the future of humanity. Though his time was drawing to a close, Emerson remained deeply committed to the ideal of individual liberty and the power of the individual spirit to shape the world. His belief in self-reliance and moral autonomy remained unwavering, even as he contemplated the legacy he would leave behind. As Emerson's health declined, he found comfort in the idea of transcendence, the belief that the human spirit was eternal and that life's journey did not end with the physical body. His earlier writings on the Oversoul, the divine essence that connects all living beings, took on new meaning as he approached the end of his life. Emerson had long believed in the idea that the individual spirit was part of a larger universal force, and in his final years, this belief provided him with a sense of peace. Death, for Emerson, was not an end but a return to the greater flow of life, a return to the cosmic unity that connected all things. On April 27, 1882, Ralph Waldo Emerson passed away at the age of 78. His death marked the end of an era for American philosophy, but his legacy would continue to influence generations of thinkers, writers, and social reformers. His philosophy of self-reliance, his belief in the power of the individual, and his reverence for nature and the divine had left an indelible mark on American intellectual life. His work would continue to shape the course of American thought, influencing writers and thinkers in fields ranging from literature to political theory to spirituality. Emerson's final years, though marked by physical decline, were also a time of quiet intellectual and spiritual reflection. His thoughts on aging, death, and the continuity of the spirit were consistent with the central themes of his work, offering a peaceful acceptance of life's impermanence. Emerson's final years were a testament to the enduring power of the individual spirit, and his legacy remains a beacon for those seeking to live with purpose, authenticity, and a deep connection to the larger universe. Ralph Waldo Emerson's death in 1882 marked the end of an era, but his intellectual influence continued to grow, shaping the trajectory of American thought and inspiring generations of thinkers, writers, and social reformers. Even after his passing, Emerson's philosophy, rooted in self-reliance, individuality, and the spiritual connection to nature, remained a guiding force for intellectual and social movements in the United States and beyond. One of the most profound aspects of Emerson's legacy is the influence he had on literature. His transcendental philosophy, with its emphasis on intuition, the divine in nature, and the importance of the individual spirit, shaped the works of numerous American writers. Henry David Thoreau, Emerson's close friend and disciple, was perhaps the most famous of these writers. Thoreau's Walden, an embodiment of Emerson's call to live simply and in harmony with nature, continues to be one of the most influential works in American literature. Thoreau's exploration of self-reliance and independence was directly inspired by Emerson's ideas, and Thoreau's belief in the power of nature mirrored Emerson's own. Walt Whitman, another giant of American literature, was deeply influenced by Emerson's transcendentalist principles. Whitman's poetry, especially in Leaves of Grass, echoes Emerson's reverence for the individual and his belief in the sacredness of the human experience. Whitman saw himself as a kindred spirit to Emerson, and in his poetry, he celebrated the uniqueness of each individual and the interconnectedness of all humanity, ideas that were central to Emerson's philosophy. The self-reliant, confident, and free-spirited voice in Whitman's work can be traced directly back to Emerson's teachings. Emerson's influence was not confined to literature alone. His ideas about the individual and the role of the self in shaping society also had a profound impact on philosophy. His emphasis on intuition, personal experience, and the rejection of external authority resonated with later thinkers in both America and Europe. Emerson's works were widely read in Europe, where thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and John Stuart Mill acknowledged his influence. Nietzsche, with his emphasis on individual will and the rejection of conventional moral codes, found resonance in Emerson's writings on self-reliance and the importance of personal integrity. While Nietzsche took these ideas in a more radical direction, The intellectual roots of his philosophy can be traced back to Emerson's calls for the liberation of the individual from societal constraints. In addition to his literary and philosophical influence, Emerson's impact on social movements was profound. His advocacy for abolition and his moral stance against slavery were significant contributions to the cause of social justice in his time. Emerson's ideas about the dignity and worth of the individual aligned closely with the abolitionist movement, which sought not only the end of slavery, but also the recognition of the inherent rights of African Americans. Emerson's lectures and writings on freedom, equality, and justice were a source of inspiration for many abolitionists, and his voice was a steady moral guide during the turbulent years leading up to the Civil War. In the decades following his death, Emerson's ideas about personal liberty and human rights continued to influence the civil rights movements of the 20th century. His belief in the sanctity of the individual and the importance of self-expression found a natural alignment with the struggle for racial equality and social reform. Leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and other figures of the civil rights movement were deeply influenced by the ethical and philosophical principles Emerson articulated throughout his life. His calls for freedom and justice resonated with those advocating for the rights of marginalized groups, and his emphasis on individual dignity inspired many to fight for the recognition of the inherent worth of all people. Emerson's contributions to American intellectual life were not limited to his own time. His works continued to be read and studied by successive generations of students, thinkers, and writers. His ideas have remained vital to the development of American philosophy, particularly in the areas of existentialism, humanism, and environmentalism. In the 20th century, thinkers like Ralph Ellison and Robert Frost, both of whom admired Emerson, drew upon his ideas in their own work, finding in his writing a source of inspiration and a model for intellectual independence. Perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of Emerson's legacy is his ability to connect deeply with the individual reader. His writing, while philosophical and intellectual, was also personal and intimate. Emerson's essays were not just theoretical discourses, but invitations for personal reflection. His work encouraged readers to question their own assumptions, to seek their own truths, and to live authentically. Emerson's emphasis on the importance of self-reliance and the inner voice remains a powerful message for anyone seeking to live a life of purpose, creativity, and meaning. Even today, Emerson's ideas continue to resonate. His works remain staples of American literature courses and are read widely in classrooms and by independent thinkers alike. His calls for self-exploration, his deep reverence for nature, and his belief in the spiritual potential of each individual continue to inspire people across cultures and generations. As the world faces new challenges, both personal and societal, the timeless wisdom of Emerson's philosophy offers a guide to navigating the complexities of modern life. In the end, Emerson's legacy is not only one of intellectual achievement, but of personal transformation. His life and work serve as a reminder of the power of the individual spirit and the importance of trusting one's own inner guidance. Emerson's influence, though rooted in the 19th century, remains as relevant today as it was during his lifetime, reminding us that the pursuit of truth, individuality, and spiritual growth is a journey that spans beyond time and place. Though Ralph Waldo Emerson lived in the 19th century, his ideas continue to resonate with the challenges and opportunities of the 20th and 21st centuries. His philosophy of self-reliance, the divine presence in nature, and the connection between humanity and the natural world remains a touchstone for modern thought. In particular, his writings on nature and individualism have found a lasting place in the environmental and self-development movements, offering both a philosophical and practical framework for addressing contemporary concerns. Emerson's deep reverence for nature, expressed in works such as Nature and his numerous essays, has proven to be incredibly prescient in the face of the environmental crises that have unfolded in the modern world. His belief in the interconnectedness of all life, and the idea that nature is not a passive backdrop to human existence, but an active and divine force, laid the groundwork for modern environmentalism. Emerson saw nature as a reflection of the divine, a spiritual force that connects all living things, and this idea has influenced environmental thinkers and activists who argue for a deeper, more ethical relationship between humans and the planet. Today, Emerson's emphasis on the spiritual and ethical dimensions of nature resonates with those advocating for ecological preservation and sustainability. His call for individuals to recognize their connection to the natural world and to act with respect and care for the environment aligns closely with contemporary movements focused on climate change, conservation, and environmental justice. Just as Emerson believed that nature could offer insights into the divine, modern environmentalists argue that a deeper understanding of the natural world is essential for the survival and flourishing of both humanity and the Earth itself. Emerson's concept of self-reliance, which encouraged individuals to trust their inner voice and seek personal authenticity, also continues to inspire the self-development movement. His insistence on the importance of individuality and his rejection of conformity speaks to a modern desire for personal empowerment. In a world that often seems driven by external pressures, Emerson's philosophy offers a reminder that true freedom comes from within, from the quiet, steadfast commitment to living in accordance with one's higher self. In today's culture, where self-help books, workshops, and personal development programs are widespread, Emerson's ideas about self-reliance continue to be a guiding principle for those seeking fulfillment and meaning. His teachings encourage individuals to trust their instincts, embrace their uniqueness, and cultivate their inner wisdom. Modern self-development thought often draws on Emerson's belief that every person has the potential to shape their own life and contribute meaningfully to the world around them. Additionally, Emerson's influence can be seen in the spiritual practices that emphasize mindfulness, meditation, and the importance of connecting with the inner self. His belief in the oversoul, the divine essence that connects all life, has parallels in modern spiritual movements that focus on the interconnectedness of all beings. Whether in Eastern philosophies such as Buddhism or New Age spiritual practices, Emerson's ideas about the divinity within each individual continue to offer a framework for personal growth and spiritual exploration. Furthermore, Emerson's contributions to the intellectual and cultural landscape of the 19th century laid the foundation for the growth of American philosophy and literature, providing a sense of intellectual independence that continues to define the American experience. His belief that each individual has the capacity to shape their own destiny has had a profound effect on American culture, encouraging generations to think critically about authority, institutions, and the meaning of freedom. Emerson's ideas also continue to resonate in the fields of psychology and existential philosophy. His emphasis on the importance of individual experience, personal responsibility, and the search for meaning aligns with the existential tradition, which focuses on the importance of personal choice and the quest for authenticity in the face of life's inherent uncertainty. Psychologists who focus on humanistic and existential approaches often cite Emerson's work as an early influence on the development of ideas related to personal growth and self-actualization. In contemporary discussions of personal freedom, human rights, and social justice, Emerson's ideas about the inherent dignity of the individual remain relevant. His advocacy for social change, particularly in the areas of abolitionism and women's rights, demonstrates how his belief in individual liberty extended beyond personal self-reliance to encompass broader social concerns. His work laid the philosophical groundwork for later social movements, and his ideas continue to inform debates about the rights of marginalized groups and the importance of creating a more just society. Even as Emerson's life ended in 1882, his influence continued to grow, and today, his work remains a vital part of the intellectual and cultural landscape. His philosophy of self-reliance, his reverence for nature, and his belief in the interconnectedness of all life continue to inspire individuals who seek personal authenticity, spiritual growth, and a deeper connection to the world around them. Emerson's message that each individual has the power to shape their own life and that nature and the divine are always within reach, remains as timely and relevant as ever. In a rapidly changing world, Emerson's work provides a steady, reflective framework for those who wish to live thoughtfully, authentically, and with purpose. His call to trust one's inner voice, to live in harmony with nature, and to seek truth with courage and independence offers a timeless philosophy that continues to inspire people seeking meaning and connection in their lives. Ralph Waldo Emerson's profound emphasis on individuality continues to influence contemporary thought and culture, particularly in the realms of personal development, social theory, and activism. His philosophy of self-reliance, articulated in works like Self-Reliance, 1841, has remained central to the ongoing conversation about the nature of the individual in society and the quest for personal growth. In an age where individualism is often championed as a path to fulfillment and success, Emerson's work provides both a philosophical foundation and a moral compass for navigating the complexities of personal identity, autonomy, and social responsibility. At the core of Emerson's philosophy is the belief that each person has a unique perspective on the world, an individual truth that is invaluable to the larger fabric of society. Emerson's assertion that trust thyself is one of the most iconic and enduring elements of his thought. In a world that often pressures individuals to conform to social norms, traditions, or expectations, Emerson's call to trust one's inner voice and instincts remains a radical and empowering idea. It encourages individuals to look inward for guidance rather than relying on external sources of authority, such as institutions, traditions, or societal expectations. The pursuit of self-reliance, as Emerson conceived it, is not about isolation or selfishness, but about understanding and cultivating one's inherent potential. Emerson believed that by embracing our own individuality, we could unlock deeper truths about ourselves and the world, which in turn could lead to positive change in society. This concept of individualism, rooted in spiritual self-discovery, continues to be relevant in contemporary society, particularly as individuals seek purpose and meaning in their lives. His ideas about self-reliance have been especially influential in the self-help and personal development movements, which encourage people to embrace their authenticity and follow their unique paths in life. Moreover, Emerson's thoughts on the individual's role in society have been significant in shaping modern ideas of democracy, social reform, and activism. Emerson was not only concerned with the development of the self, but also with how the self, once developed, could contribute meaningfully to society. His belief that personal growth is intrinsically connected to the broader well-being of society is a recurring theme in his works. In Self-Reliance, Emerson wrote that, "The only right is what is after my constitution. The only wrong is what is against it," suggesting that true moral action comes from a life aligned with one's authentic self. This call to act in harmony with one's deepest values has resonated with those who believe that individual actions, grounded in integrity and self-awareness, can catalyze positive change in the larger world. Emerson's advocacy for individual empowerment also has enduring applications in the fight for social justice and civil rights. His rejection of societal norms and insistence on personal authenticity can be seen as a precursor to the civil rights movements that gained momentum in the 20th century. His influence on thinkers like Frederick Douglass, who was directly inspired by Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance, illustrates how Emerson's work contributed to the intellectual foundations of social reform movements. Douglass, a former enslaved person who became a powerful advocate for abolition, argued for the recognition of the humanity and individuality of African Americans, a theme that echoes Emerson's own calls for the individual to be liberated from external constraints. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Emerson's ideas have been invoked in discussions about individual rights, the rights of marginalized communities, and the quest for personal and collective freedom. His work influenced the feminist movement, with writers such as Margaret Fuller, who was both a contemporary of Emerson and an intellectual ally, drawing on Emerson's ideas to advocate for women's rights and gender equality. Fuller's work, Woman in the 19th Century, 1845, mirrors many of the same concerns Emerson addressed, particularly the importance of recognizing the full potential of the individual, regardless of gender. Emerson's influence also continues to shape contemporary discussions on the environment. His reverence for nature and his belief in the interconnectedness of all life have made his work foundational to the environmental movement. Just as Emerson believed that nature was a reflection of the divine, many environmentalists today view the earth as sacred, requiring the same kind of respect and stewardship Emerson advocated for in his own time. His writing on nature, particularly Nature, 1836, remains a central text for those who believe that a deeper connection to the earth can lead to more sustainable and harmonious ways of living. Environmental advocates continue to turn to Emerson's writings for guidance on how to reconcile human needs with ecological responsibility, reflecting the continued relevance of his ideas. In the 21st century, Emerson's philosophy of individuality, personal integrity, and interconnectedness with nature has been adapted to fit contemporary challenges. As the world confronts issues such as climate change, political polarization, and social inequality, Emerson's insistence on the importance of personal action and moral clarity continues to inspire those who seek to address these problems. His work challenges us to think critically about the values that shape our society, urging us to cultivate a deeper connection to our own inner truths and to act with integrity for the collective good. In a rapidly changing world, Emerson's call to trust oneself and embrace individual potential remains a guiding principle for personal and societal transformation. Whether in the realms of personal development, social justice, or environmental sustainability, his philosophy encourages individuals to tap into their unique abilities, to stand firm in their values, and to contribute meaningfully to the world. Emerson's timeless ideas offer a path toward greater self-awareness, ethical action, and a more connected, compassionate society. Ralph Waldo Emerson's influence on American identity extends far beyond his own time, shaping the cultural and intellectual climate of the 20th century in profound ways. His philosophy of self-reliance, the sanctity of the individual, and the spiritual presence of nature became central to the American ethos, influencing the development of American literature, social movements, and the concept of national identity itself. Emerson's ideas contributed to the emergence of what we now recognize as the uniquely American notion of individualism. His belief that each person is endowed with an innate connection to the divine and to the larger universe became a guiding principle for later generations seeking to assert their personal autonomy. This emphasis on individualism not only resonated with writers and thinkers, but also became a foundational element of the American cultural narrative. As the United States entered the 20th century, the ideals Emerson championed were woven into the fabric of American thought, becoming an integral part of the national character. In literature, Emerson's transcendentalism directly influenced the works of American writers who sought to express the inner lives of individuals in ways that were free from external constraints. Figures like Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, and William James were inspired by Emerson's calls for authenticity and self-expression. Whitman's poetry, for instance, reflected Emerson's belief in the sanctity of the individual. In Leaves of Grass, Whitman celebrated the unity of all life while embracing the unique qualities of the individual. Whitman's expansive free verse language was a direct result of Emerson's rejection of conventional forms in favor of the individual's internal voice. While Emerson's influence on literature is widely acknowledged, his impact on American social and political thought is equally significant. His calls for social reform, particularly in the realms of slavery and women's rights, resonated with the broader cultural movements of the 19th and 20th centuries. As the United States grappled with its identity in the wake of slavery and the Civil War, Emerson's work provided intellectual support for those seeking to expand the notion of freedom and equality. His insistence on the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of race or gender, made him an early voice in the fight for civil rights. In the 20th century, Emerson's ideas about social justice, individual rights, and the pursuit of personal growth found new expression in the civil rights movement and the feminist movement. Leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., who sought to advance equality and freedom, drew inspiration from Emerson's advocacy for the intrinsic dignity of every person. King's notion of nonviolent resistance was grounded in Emerson's belief in the power of individual conscience and moral action. Similarly, feminist writers and activists in the 20th century, inspired by Emerson's thoughts on self-reliance, advocated for women's independence and empowerment, emphasizing the need for women to trust their own voices and reclaim their place in the world. Emerson's influence also extended to the environmental movement, which gained significant momentum in the 20th century. His writings on nature, particularly his belief that nature was a reflection of the divine, provided a philosophical foundation for the growing environmental consciousness. As the world faced increasing ecological challenges, Emerson's call for a deep connection to nature resonated with environmentalists who viewed the destruction of the environment as a violation of both human integrity and spiritual truth. In Nature and Other Works, Emerson emphasized the importance of respecting the earth and recognizing its spiritual significance, ideas that would become foundational to modern environmental ethics. The 20th century also saw Emerson's ideas shaping the development of modern psychology, particularly in the humanistic and existential traditions. Psychologists like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, who emphasized the importance of self-actualization and personal growth, found parallels in Emerson's work. Emerson's focus on the development of the self, his belief in personal intuition, and the divinity within, mirrored the humanistic principles that sought to empower individuals to realize their full potential. His work on self-reliance, with its emphasis on inner strength and moral clarity, became a cornerstone of therapeutic practices that focused on building self-esteem, autonomy, and self-expression. Emerson's influence also permeated the broader cultural climate, especially in the era of American exceptionalism. His focus on the individual and his rejection of traditional authority were qualities that aligned with the American mythos of freedom and independence. In the 20th century, as America took its place as a global power, Emerson's ideas about the potential for individual action to affect social change provided a philosophical justification for the nation's belief in its own capacity for progress and leadership. Emerson's intellectual legacy remained a source of inspiration for social reformers, philosophers, and writers throughout the 20th century. His belief in the sanctity of the individual spirit and the divine presence in nature encouraged a re-examination of the relationship between people, society, and the environment. His ideas were not only relevant to thinkers and writers, but also to activists and reformers who sought to make America a more just and equitable society. As we move further into the 21st century, Emerson's legacy endures. His works continue to be read, studied, and interpreted by new generations of readers who seek to understand the intersection of individuality, social responsibility, and the larger forces of the universe. Emerson's focus on self-reliance and the divine presence within nature provides a timeless framework for personal growth, environmental stewardship, and social justice, offering a guiding philosophy for those who seek to make sense of the complexities of modern life. Ralph Waldo Emerson's intellectual legacy endures strongly in contemporary thought, continuing to inspire philosophers, writers, and activists who seek to explore the deeper questions of existence, individuality, and the human relationship to the world around us. His emphasis on self-reliance, personal authenticity, and the spiritual significance of nature has left an indelible mark on modern philosophical, social, and environmental movements. In a world increasingly focused on personal identity, autonomy, and social justice, Emerson's ideas offer a timeless framework for reflection and action. In contemporary philosophy, Emerson's transcendentalism has found resonance in both existentialism and humanism. His belief in the intrinsic worth and potential of each individual, as well as the necessity of trusting one's inner voice, aligns closely with existentialist thought, which focuses on the individual's responsibility for creating meaning in an otherwise indifferent universe. Thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, who emphasize the freedom of individuals to define their own existence, share many of the same concerns Emerson raised about personal autonomy and self-determination. Emerson's idea that individuals must trust their inner wisdom and forge their own path mirrors existentialism's emphasis on personal choice and authenticity. In the realm of humanism, Emerson's influence is similarly profound. His focus on human dignity, the moral responsibility of the individual, and the potential for personal growth resonated deeply with 20th century humanist philosophers such as Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Both Rogers and Maslow, pioneers in humanistic psychology, sought to understand and support the growth of the individual as a means of improving society as a whole. They were inspired by Emerson's belief that the individual was a force for positive change when allowed to live in accordance with their true nature. Today, humanistic psychology and self-help movements continue to draw on Emerson's teachings, encouraging individuals to look within themselves for strength, wisdom, and direction. Moreover, Emerson's ideas are integral to modern environmentalism. His belief that nature is a reflection of divine truth and that humans are spiritually connected to the natural world resonates strongly with contemporary environmental thought, which emphasizes sustainability, ecological balance, and the sacredness of the earth. Emerson's reverence for nature has become a foundational principle in movements such as deep ecology, which advocates for a holistic view of humanity's place within the larger ecosystem. Environmentalists and activists, following in Emerson's footsteps, continue to argue for the protection of nature, not just for its practical benefits, but for its spiritual value. In an era marked by climate change and environmental degradation, Emerson's vision of nature as sacred and interconnected provides an ethical framework for environmental stewardship. His belief that humanity cannot thrive in isolation from the natural world has inspired efforts to reconnect with the earth in ways that honor its intrinsic value. Activists who are driven by the need for sustainable living often cite Emerson's writings as a source of motivation, recognizing that a profound respect for nature and its processes is integral to preserving the planet for future generations. Additionally, Emerson's ideas on individuality and social change continue to inform contemporary debates on personal and collective freedom. His calls for the moral liberation of the individual resonate with modern movements for civil rights, gender equality, and LGBTQ+ rights. Just as Emerson argued for the liberation of the individual from societal constraints, contemporary social movements continue to push for the recognition of personal freedoms and human dignity, advocating for policies and practices that honor and protect individual autonomy. His work has had a direct influence on thinkers and activists working for social justice, providing both intellectual guidance and moral clarity as they strive to create a more inclusive and equitable society. The enduring relevance of Emerson's ideas is particularly evident in the realm of self-development and wellness. Today, his call for self-reliance is a central tenet of personal growth practices, mindfulness, and wellness culture. In an age marked by rapid technological change, economic uncertainty, and social upheaval, many people turn to Emerson's writings to find clarity and direction. His work encourages individuals to trust their intuition, live authentically, and find purpose within themselves. Ideas that resonate deeply in the modern quest for meaning, mindfulness, meditation, and the cultivation of inner peace, concepts central to contemporary wellness movements, are rooted in the very principles Emerson espoused in his work. His exploration of the self, the interconnectedness of all life, and the pursuit of spiritual growth continue to inspire those seeking to live more mindful and meaningful lives. In the 21st century, Emerson's insistence that we each must be yourself and trust our own inner voice offers a beacon for those navigating the complexities of modern existence. Emerson's thoughts on the interdependence of all people and the importance of social and moral responsibility also have a growing presence in contemporary discussions about social justice and ethics. As movements like Black Lives Matter, the push for gender equality, and the advocacy for immigrants' rights continue to gain momentum, Emerson's call for moral action and self-responsibility remains a guiding light for those advocating for systemic change. His insistence that individuals must act according to their highest principles, regardless of the pressures to conform, continues to empower those who fight for a more just and compassionate society. In essence, Emerson's ideas remain a vital and inspiring force in modern intellectual and social life. His philosophy continues to speak to the needs of individuals and communities in the 21st century, offering timeless wisdom for navigating the challenges of modern life. Whether in the realms of personal development, social justice, or environmental activism, Emerson's belief in the power of the individual to shape the world remains a profound and inspiring message for today's world. One of Ralph Waldo Emerson's most profound and enduring contributions to philosophy and spirituality is his concept of the oversoul, which he introduced in his essay of the same name, 1841. For Emerson, the oversoul was an overarching universal spirit that connects all human beings and is, in essence, the divine presence that permeates everything in nature and the universe. This idea of an interconnected spiritual force has continued to resonate across various spiritual traditions, philosophical schools, and modern movements, serving as a foundation for contemporary understandings of unity, interconnectedness, and collective consciousness. Emerson's oversoul is not merely a philosophical abstraction. It represents a deep spiritual truth about the essential oneness of all life. He described it as a force greater than the individual self, yet also embedded in every individual. For Emerson, it was the divine presence that bound all humans together and connected each person to the natural world. This view of the oversoul offered a radical departure from conventional religious dogma, as it did not rely on external religious authority or ritual. Instead, Emerson argued that the oversoul could be accessed through personal intuition, self-reflection, and an intimate relationship with nature. In contemporary spiritual and philosophical discourse, Emerson's concept of the oversoul finds striking parallels in various movements that emphasize the interconnectedness of all life. In modern discussions of collective consciousness, especially within New Age spirituality, deep ecology, and certain branches of psychology, the idea that every individual is part of a larger interconnected whole resonates strongly. The oversoul, in Emerson's terms, speaks to the modern understanding that human beings are not isolated beings, but are intrinsically linked to each other and the world around them. For instance, in modern psychology, particularly in the humanistic and transpersonal schools of thought, Emerson's ideas have inspired the development of concepts related to the collective unconscious, as popularized by Carl Jung. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious echoes Emerson's notion of a shared, universal spiritual force, one that transcends individual experience and connects all people. This idea suggests that there is a deeper shared level of human experience that individuals can tap into through introspection, self-awareness, and spiritual practice. Emerson's oversoul, though not explicitly formulated in psychological terms, can be understood as a precursor to these modern ideas about a collective spiritual or psychological inheritance. In environmentalism, Emerson's oversoul continues to influence the way people understand the relationship between humans and nature. His belief that nature is a direct manifestation of the divine echoes modern, ecological movements that emphasize the sanctity and spiritual value of the earth. Today, many environmental activists argue that humanity must not only protect nature for its ecological value, but also for its intrinsic spiritual and moral worth. Just as Emerson saw nature as a reflection of the divine, modern environmentalists often speak about the need for a deep, respectful connection to the earth, an interconnectedness that acknowledges both the physical and spiritual dimensions of our relationship with the natural world. Furthermore, Emerson's oversoul has resonated deeply within the context of social justice movements. His belief in the divine connection between all human beings offers a powerful moral framework for advocating equality and fairness in society. If all individuals are connected through the Oversoul, then the dignity and worth of every person are sacred and must be upheld. Emerson's vision of interconnectedness has inspired contemporary thinkers to explore the ethical implications of our shared humanity, from racial and gender equality to global human rights. Social justice advocates often draw on Emerson's ideas to argue for the recognition of each person's intrinsic worth and the moral imperative to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to live in accordance with their highest potential. The notion of interconnectedness also finds resonance in modern discussions of mindfulness and meditation. Today, mindfulness practices, which emphasize being present in the moment and understanding the interconnection between all things, align closely with Emerson's philosophical and spiritual teachings. By focusing on the present moment and the unity of mind, body, and spirit, individuals practicing mindfulness and meditation come to recognize that they are part of a larger, more expansive reality. Much like Emerson's Oversoul suggests, these practices encourage individuals to transcend the ego and connect to a higher, collective consciousness, a goal that parallels Emerson's idea that the Oversoul transcends individual selfhood while remaining present within each person. The concept of the Oversoul also influences contemporary philosophical discussions about the nature of the self. In a world that often emphasizes individual identity and personal achievement, Emerson's vision of a shared, universal spirit encourages a rethinking of what it means to be an individual. The Oversoul suggests that our true identity is not separate from others, but part of a larger, more holistic existence. This notion challenges contemporary ideas that often define success in terms of isolated, individual accomplishment, offering instead a more expansive view of identity as something interwoven with the collective whole. Moreover, Emerson's Oversoul encourages individuals to seek a deeper spiritual understanding of their place in the universe. In an era marked by materialism, consumerism, and social division, Emerson's vision of interconnectedness provides a powerful antidote, urging people to cultivate awareness of the broader spiritual truths that bind them together with others and it is a reminder that despite the seeming separateness of individuals and experiences, we're all part of the same spiritual fabric, each person, each living thing contributing to the greater divine whole. Ralph Waldo Emerson's philosophical and spiritual ideas have not only influenced the realm of literature and personal development, but have also played a significant role in shaping social and political movements, particularly those advocating for social justice, civil rights, and individual freedom. His calls for individual self-reliance, moral integrity, and the recognition of the intrinsic worth of every human being resonate deeply in contemporary discussions about equality, freedom, and the pursuit of justice. One of Emerson's core beliefs was that true freedom comes from within, that each person is endowed with an innate ability to shape their own destiny through the exercise of personal will and moral conviction. This philosophy has had a profound impact on movements for social change, where the emphasis is often placed on the empowerment of individuals to challenge systemic injustices. In particular, Emerson's ideas on the sanctity of the individual and the importance of following one's inner moral compass have influenced the ethical foundations of civil rights movements, feminist movements, and other progressive causes. In the 20th century, during the civil rights movement, Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance and equality became a beacon for leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who invoked the transcendentalist emphasis on the dignity and worth of every individual. King's advocacy for nonviolent resistance and his calls for racial equality were deeply rooted in the belief that all individuals, regardless of race, deserve the same opportunities for freedom and fulfillment. King's speeches and writings often reflect Emerson's vision of personal freedom as something that transcends the external structures of society and law. King was influenced by Emerson's belief that every individual has the ability to transcend the limitations imposed by external authorities. In Self-Reliance, Emerson writes, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself." And this idea, urging individuals to find their strength and truth from within, became a central tenet in King's calls for peaceful resistance against racial injustice. King's advocacy for justice, grounded in the inherent dignity of every human being, echoed Emerson's belief in the moral responsibility of individuals to act in accordance with their highest truths, regardless of external pressures. Similarly, Emerson's ideas have had a lasting influence on feminist movements. His call for self-expression, personal autonomy, and the rejection of societal constraints resonated with women who were fighting for their right to education, employment, and equality in the political sphere. Feminist thinkers and activists in the 19th and 20th centuries found in Emerson a philosophy that supported their calls for women's liberation and empowerment. Margaret Fuller, one of the key figures in the early feminist movement, was a close contemporary and intellectual ally of Emerson. Her groundbreaking work, Woman in the 19th Century, 1845, draws heavily on Emersonian themes of self-reliance, individuality, and moral autonomy. Fuller, like Emerson, believed that women should not be confined by traditional gender roles, but should instead be empowered to define their own paths in life. In the 20th century, women's rights activists such as Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem also found inspiration in Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance and individualism. Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, 1963, which critiqued the limitations placed on women in post-World War II America, called for women to break free from traditional societal expectations and seek fulfillment outside of domesticity. Friedan's calls for women to claim their personal and professional autonomy align closely with Emerson's philosophy, particularly his insistence on the importance of trusting oneself and rejecting external definitions of success and purpose. Emerson's influence can also be seen in contemporary debates about freedom, identity, and social justice. In today's world, where the fight for LGBTQ+ rights, racial equality, and gender justice continues to unfold, Emerson's advocacy for individual liberty and moral courage provides a philosophical foundation for the pursuit of social reform. His rejection of conformity and his insistence on the importance of personal authenticity resonate with modern activists who challenge systems of oppression and inequality. In the 21st century, Emerson's belief in the interconnectedness of all human beings and his vision of a society where individuals are free to express their unique truths have become central to the global fight for human rights. Whether it's the ongoing efforts for racial justice, the movement for climate justice, or the push for gender equality, Emerson's teachings about the sanctity of the individual and the moral imperative to fight for justice continue to inspire those who work toward a more equitable and just world. The modern environmental movement, too, draws on Emerson's reverence for nature and his belief that human beings are intrinsically connected to the natural world. Emerson's assertion that nature is a reflection of the divine has been a source of inspiration for environmental activists who argue that humanity must not only protect the environment for its ecological value, but also for its intrinsic spiritual and moral worth. His work provides an intellectual and ethical framework for the call to respect the earth as sacred and to live in a way that honors the interconnectedness of all life. The enduring relevance of Emerson's ideas in contemporary social and political movements speaks to the timeless nature of his philosophy. His calls for personal authenticity, social justice, and a deeper connection to the divine have shaped the ethical and intellectual foundations of numerous progressive movements. Whether advocating for racial equality, gender justice, or environmental sustainability, Emerson's work continues to provide a moral guide for those seeking to create a more just, equitable, and compassionate world. Ralph Waldo Emerson's teachings on self-reliance, individualism, and the interconnectedness of all life continue to resonate deeply with contemporary spiritual practices, particularly in the realms of mindfulness, meditation, and personal growth. His belief in the divinity within each individual and the spiritual significance of nature laid the foundation for many modern spiritual movements that seek to help people reconnect with their inner selves and the world around them. Emerson's focus on the development of the individual's inner life has had a lasting influence on how we approach spirituality today. In recent decades, the practice of mindfulness has gained increasing popularity, and many modern mindfulness practitioners can trace the roots of this practice to Emerson's philosophy. Mindfulness, which involves being fully present and engaged in the moment, with an awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, and surroundings, mirrors Emerson's calls for individuals to cultivate self-awareness and trust their inner voice. Emerson's emphasis on the importance of personal intuition and the quiet, reflective inner voice has found a natural alignment with modern mindfulness techniques, which encourage individuals to listen deeply to their inner selves and engage with the world with intention and presence. Emerson's work often focused on the value of solitude and introspection as a means of spiritual and personal growth. In his essay Self-Reliance, he wrote, "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist." For Emerson, personal growth was rooted in the ability to detach from societal expectations and to look inward for guidance. This focus on cultivating inner strength and authenticity resonates with the core tenets of mindfulness practice, which encourages individuals to be fully present with themselves, to accept their thoughts without judgment, and to trust in their own experiences. Furthermore, Emerson's reverence for nature as a divine force is also reflected in modern spiritual practices that emphasize connecting with nature for personal renewal and spiritual insight. Emerson's belief that nature serves as a mirror for the divine suggests that by immersing ourselves in nature, we can come into closer contact with our true selves and the spiritual forces that surround us. Today, practices such as forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, and eco-spirituality are gaining traction as people seek to reconnect with the natural world in order to achieve spiritual peace and clarity. These practices echo Emerson's own belief that nature is not only a source of beauty and inspiration, but also a means of accessing deeper spiritual truths. Emerson's ideas also align with the modern focus on personal development and self-empowerment. His teachings have become foundational to the self-help movement, with his emphasis on self-reliance and moral integrity serving as guiding principles for those seeking to live more purposeful lives. His belief that each individual has the potential to shape their own destiny, and that true freedom comes from within, has inspired countless individuals to take ownership of their lives and pursue personal growth. In the world of self-help, Emerson's work is often cited as a source of wisdom and guidance for those who seek to cultivate greater self-awareness, develop their full potential, and live in alignment with their values. In today's culture, where individuals are often overwhelmed by external pressures and societal expectations, Emerson's philosophy offers a way to find balance and peace. By encouraging individuals to trust themselves, embrace their uniqueness, and recognize the divine presence within them, Emerson provides a pathway for personal and spiritual growth that is rooted in self-discovery and inner strength. His call for individuals to seek connection with their higher selves, rather than relying on external validation, resonates with those who are looking for ways to live more authentically and in harmony with their true nature. Moreover, the principles of Emerson's transcendentalism have influenced contemporary spiritual leaders and thinkers. Many modern spiritual teachers, such as Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra, echo Emerson's ideas about the interconnectedness of all beings and the importance of inner awareness. Tolle, in particular, speaks about the importance of being present in the moment and transcending the ego, concepts that resonate deeply with Emerson's call for individuals to transcend external influences and cultivate an authentic connection with the world around them. Chopra's teachings on meditation and spiritual awareness are also rooted in the same belief that individuals can access deeper truths through introspection, mindfulness, and connection with the divine essence that permeates all of life. Emerson's influence is also felt in modern discussions about spiritual but not religious SBNR practices, which have become increasingly popular in the 21st century. Many individuals today are seeking spiritual fulfillment outside of traditional religious institutions, and Emerson's work provides a framework for understanding spirituality in a personal individualistic way. His rejection of organized religion in favor of a more personal experiential connection with the divine resonates with the growing number of people who identify as SBNR, seeking to explore spiritual truths without adhering to dogma or external authority. In summary, Emerson's influence continues to shape contemporary spiritual practices, particularly those that emphasize self-reliance, mindfulness, and the divine presence within all individuals. His belief in the power of the individual to shape their own spiritual path, along with his reverence for nature and the interconnectedness of all life, provides a timeless foundation for those seeking personal growth, spiritual connection, and a deeper understanding of the world. Emerson's work encourages individuals to look within, trust themselves, and embrace the transformative power of spirituality, making his ideas as relevant today as they were in the 19th century. Ralph Waldo Emerson's thoughts on education were deeply rooted in his transcendental philosophy, which emphasized the importance of self-reliance, personal intuition, and the individual's connection to nature and the divine. Emerson viewed education as more than just the transmission of knowledge. It was, in his eyes, a process of self-discovery, intellectual growth, and spiritual awakening. His ideas on education continue to resonate in modern approaches to teaching and learning, particularly in progressive educational philosophies that prioritize creativity, independence, and the development of the whole person. For Emerson, the goal of education was not simply to equip individuals with information, but to help them cultivate a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the world. In his essay Education, 1845, Emerson argued that true learning occurs when individuals are encouraged to think for themselves, to trust their inner voice, and to question conventional wisdom. He believed that educators should nurture the natural curiosity and creativity of their students, rather than stifling it with rigid structures or standardized curricula. This emphasis on cultivating the inner life of the student aligns with modern educational movements that stress the importance of intellectual autonomy and personal expression. Emerson's belief in the importance of self-reliance in education was revolutionary for his time. He argued that individuals should not rely solely on external authorities, whether teachers, institutions, or traditions, but should trust their own instincts and abilities. This idea laid the groundwork for the progressive education movement, which emerged in the early 20th century with figures like John Dewey, who emphasized experiential learning, critical thinking, and the development of independent thought. Dewey, much like Emerson, believed that education should empower students to engage with the world actively and thoughtfully, rather than passively receiving information. Both Emerson and Dewey championed the idea that true education nurtures the whole person, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. In modern classrooms, Emerson's educational philosophy continues to influence teaching strategies that prioritize student-centered learning, creativity, and critical inquiry. Project-based learning, for example, encourages students to explore real-world problems and collaborate with others to find solutions. This type of learning reflects Emerson's belief that education should be dynamic, interactive, and rooted in the individual's interests and passions. Just as Emerson advocated for the development of independent thinkers, contemporary educators seek to create environments where students feel empowered to think critically, ask questions, and challenge assumptions. Emerson's ideas on the importance of nature in education also continue to resonate in modern educational approaches. In his work, he consistently emphasized the value of direct experience with the natural world, believing that nature was a source of spiritual insight and personal reflection. This belief aligns with contemporary efforts to incorporate outdoor learning and environmental education into school curricula. Programs that encourage children to learn through nature, whether through nature walks, gardening, or environmental science, are a reflection of Emerson's philosophy that the natural world is not only a setting for learning, but an essential partner in the educational process. Additionally, Emerson's focus on the development of the individual's moral and spiritual capacities remains central to the modern educational landscape. While contemporary education systems are often focused on academic achievement and standardized testing, there is a growing recognition of the importance of character education, social emotional learning, and ethical decision-making. Emerson's teachings, which emphasize the cultivation of personal integrity, moral responsibility, and a deep connection to one's higher self, are integral to these modern educational initiatives. His belief that true education encourages students to live in accordance with their highest principles and to contribute meaningfully to society is increasingly seen as essential to preparing students for life beyond the classroom. Emerson's rejection of rote memorization and his insistence on the value of independent thought also anticipate the development of educational practices that prioritize inquiry-based learning. Rather than passively absorbing information, students are encouraged to engage with concepts, question assumptions, and develop their own conclusions. This kind of learning, which encourages curiosity and intellectual exploration, mirrors Emerson's vision of education as a process of continuous self-discovery. Modern educational philosophies that emphasize the importance of asking questions, exploring multiple perspectives, and embracing intellectual uncertainty are direct descendants of Emerson's belief that education should empower individuals to think for themselves and trust their inner wisdom. Moreover, Emerson's ideas on education are reflected in the growing recognition of the importance of lifelong learning. As the world becomes increasingly complex and interconnected, the need for individuals to continue their education beyond formal schooling has become more apparent. Emerson's philosophy, which emphasizes the ongoing development of the self, encourages individuals to view learning as a lifelong pursuit, one that involves continual self-reflection, personal growth, and intellectual curiosity. In the modern world, where the rapid pace of change requires adaptability and continuous learning, Emerson's call for lifelong education resonates more than ever. In a world that often values technical skills and vocational training, Emerson's vision of education as a means of cultivating moral and spiritual depth serves as a reminder that education should be about more than just preparing individuals for careers. True education, according to Emerson, should prepare individuals to live meaningful, purposeful lives that are grounded in personal integrity, intellectual curiosity, and a deep understanding of the world. In this sense, his ideas continue to inspire educators and learners alike to pursue an education that nurtures the whole person, rather than simply focusing on external achievements. In conclusion, Emerson's philosophy of education remains relevant in today's world, influencing contemporary teaching practices and educational philosophies. His belief in the power of the individual, the importance of nature, and the role of education in nurturing intellectual, moral, and spiritual growth continues to inform modern approaches to learning. Emerson's ideas encourage us to view education not as a static process, but as a dynamic, lifelong journey of self-discovery, personal growth, and meaningful engagement with the world. In the 21st century, society faces unprecedented challenges, from the complexities of global interconnectedness to the rapid advancement of technology, environmental crises, and a search for deeper meaning in an increasingly fast-paced world. Amid these challenges, Ralph Waldo Emerson's teachings on self-reliance, individual integrity, and the interconnectedness of all life remain deeply relevant. His ideas provide a philosophical and spiritual framework for navigating the complexities of modern life, offering insight into how we can live authentically, cultivate meaning, and contribute to the well-being of the world around us. Emerson's concept of the oversoul, the universal spirit connecting all living beings, resonates strongly in today's interconnected world. As globalization continues to bring people from diverse cultures into closer contact, there is an increasing recognition of the need for a shared understanding of our common humanity. Emerson's belief that all people are interconnected through a universal divine essence offers a moral foundation for building relationships that transcend national, cultural, and religious boundaries. His vision of interconnectedness encourages us to view the world as a network of relationships, rather than a collection of isolated entities, and to approach global issues with empathy, compassion, and a sense of collective responsibility. In the face of growing environmental challenges, Emerson's reverence for nature and his belief that nature is a reflection of the divine offer important guidance for modern environmentalism. His writings encourage a deep respect for the earth and its ecosystems, calling on individuals and societies to recognize the spiritual and ethical value of the natural world. In Nature and Other Works, Emerson describes the natural world not only as a source of aesthetic beauty, but as a living, breathing force that holds profound spiritual significance. As we confront climate change, pollution, and the degradation of ecosystems, Emerson's ideas continue to inspire those who advocate for a more harmonious relationship with the environment, one that recognizes the interdependence of all life. Emerson's ideas also have much to offer in the age of technology. In a world dominated by digital communication, social media, and the rapid expansion of artificial intelligence, Emerson's emphasis on the importance of inner reflection and intellectual autonomy provides a counterbalance to the constant barrage of external stimuli. His call for individuals to trust their inner voice and to live authentically speaks directly to the current need for mindfulness in a digital age, where distractions are ubiquitous and the line between the self and external influences can become blurred. While technology has undoubtedly created vast opportunities for progress and connection, it has also raised questions about the impact of automation, artificial intelligence, and the erosion of personal privacy. Emerson's philosophy of self-reliance offers a guiding principle for those seeking to maintain autonomy and moral integrity in the face of technological advances that may threaten individual freedom and agency. His belief in the importance of cultivating an inner, authentic self, one that is not dictated by external forces, encourages individuals to reflect critically on the role of technology in their lives and to ensure that technological advancements align with their deeper values. Moreover, Emerson's focus on personal growth and the development of the whole person, intellectually, morally, and spiritually, remains relevant in today's world, where many individuals are grappling with the complexities of modern life. In an era where external success is often defined by material wealth, status, and professional achievement, Emerson's insistence on the importance of inner growth and moral integrity offers a more holistic approach to success. He encourages individuals to look inward, to trust their intuition, and to seek meaning beyond the surface-level achievements that dominate contemporary society. In addition, Emerson's emphasis on the importance of solitude and self-reflection offers a powerful antidote to the overwhelming noise and distractions of modern life. In a world where many are constantly plugged into digital devices and social media, Emerson's call for individuals to spend time in nature, to engage in quiet contemplation, and to cultivate a deeper connection with their true selves becomes a vital practice for maintaining mental and emotional well-being. His teachings remind us that true peace and fulfillment come not from external validation or constant busyness, but from inner stillness and self-awareness. Emerson's teachings also encourage us to address the larger ethical and moral challenges facing society. His belief that individuals must act in accordance with their highest principles remains a potent call to action in today's world, where issues such as income inequality, racial injustice, and political polarization demand urgent attention. Emerson's philosophy challenges individuals to rise above external pressures and to live with integrity, courage, and compassion. His work serves as a reminder that personal and societal transformation begins with the individual, by cultivating moral clarity, self-reliance, and a commitment to justice and truth. As we navigate the complexities of modern life, Emerson's legacy offers timeless wisdom for living authentically, maintaining moral integrity, and fostering a sense of interconnectedness with others and the natural world. His philosophy encourages us to embrace the challenges of the present with a deep sense of purpose, guided by the principles of individual autonomy, respect for nature, and the pursuit of personal and collective growth. Ralph Waldo Emerson's insistence on moral integrity and individual action continues to resonate in times of social upheaval, reminding us that the strength of society lies in the ethical choices of its individuals. In a world marked by systemic inequality, political polarization, and global challenges, Emerson's call for individuals to live according to their highest principles and to act with moral clarity is more relevant than ever. His philosophy of self-reliance, grounded in the belief that individuals must trust their inner voice and act in alignment with their moral compass, offers guidance for navigating these turbulent times. Emerson's vision of self-reliance was not merely about independence or self-interest. It was about the responsibility of individuals to act with integrity, to stand up for justice, and to contribute meaningfully to the common good. In Self-Reliance, he famously wrote, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles." This idea emphasizes that true peace and fulfillment come not from external circumstances, but from living in accordance with one's deepest values, even when those values are at odds with societal expectations. This emphasis on moral clarity and the pursuit of justice continues to inspire social activists today. In the 20th and 21st centuries, movements for civil rights, environmental justice, gender equality, and LGBTQ+ rights have all drawn on Emerson's ideas about the individual's role in bringing about positive change. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela, who fought for justice in the face of oppression, embodied the principle of non-violent resistance grounded in deep moral conviction, a principle that Emerson championed. Throughout his life, they recognized that change begins with individuals who are willing to stand firm in their beliefs and act with courage, even in the face of adversity. Emerson's ideas have also been influential in shaping contemporary social justice movements, including those advocating for racial equality, immigrant rights, and gender justice. In a world where systemic oppression and discrimination persist, his work calls on individuals to reject complacency and take responsibility for creating a more just society. Emerson believed that individuals must not only seek personal freedom, but also advocate for the freedom and dignity of others, especially those marginalized by society. His work challenges us to ask difficult questions about our own role in perpetuating or combating injustice, and to recognize that true progress comes from moral action taken by individuals who choose to live by their principles. In the context of modern environmental movements, Emerson's advocacy for the preservation of nature and his recognition of the divine in the natural world continue to guide those working to address climate change and environmental degradation. His belief that nature is a reflection of the divine and that humanity is morally responsible for protecting the earth aligns with contemporary efforts to foster environmental stewardship and sustainability. As society grapples with the realities of climate change, loss of biodiversity, and the exploitation of natural resources, Emerson's call for individuals to act in harmony with nature remains a powerful guiding principle. Emerson's work also encourages us to examine the broader ethical implications of modern technology. In an age where technological advancements often outpace our ability to understand their consequences, Emerson's call for moral clarity and self-awareness is particularly pertinent. His philosophy suggests that technology should not be pursued for its own sake, but should be used in ways that promote human flourishing, justice, and environmental sustainability. In a world increasingly shaped by artificial intelligence, automation, and digital technologies, Emerson's reminder to act with integrity, to stay true to our deepest values, and to ensure that our actions benefit the greater good remains a critical guidepost for ethical decision-making. Furthermore, Emerson's belief that individuals should transcend societal pressures and think for themselves is especially important in today's era of information overload. With the rise of social media and the constant flow of news and opinions, it can be difficult to distinguish between authentic self-expression and the noise of external influences. Emerson's insistence on self-reliance offers a counterbalance to the pressures of conformity and the temptation to follow the crowd. His work encourages us to cultivate the ability to think critically, to stay grounded in our own beliefs, and to resist the temptation to adopt opinions or lifestyles based solely on external validation. In times of political and social division, Emerson's call to live according to one's highest principles offers a pathway to reconciliation and moral leadership. Rather than succumbing to polarization or cynicism, Emerson's philosophy encourages individuals to act with integrity, to listen deeply to their inner voice, and to engage in the world with compassion and courage. His emphasis on moral action and the pursuit of truth offers a model for how we can navigate the challenges of our time with clarity, authenticity, and moral conviction. As we continue to face global crises, from climate change to political unrest to inequality, Emerson's work reminds us that the moral foundation of society is built upon the actions of individuals who choose to live in accordance with their highest values. His call for self-reliance, moral clarity, and personal responsibility offers a timeless framework for addressing the most pressing challenges of our time. In the end, Emerson's legacy is not only in his ideas but in the lives of those who take up his call to live with integrity and work toward a more just and compassionate world. As we reflect on the life and ideas of Ralph Waldo Emerson, it becomes clear that his influence has shaped not only the intellectual landscape of the 19th century, but also the moral, spiritual, and philosophical fabric of the world today. His transcendental philosophy, rooted in the belief of self-reliance, the divine presence in nature, and the interconnectedness of all beings, continues to resonate deeply in a modern world filled with both challenges and opportunities for personal and collective growth. Emerson's call for individuals to trust themselves, to cultivate their inner wisdom, and to embrace their unique potential has inspired countless thinkers, artists, and activists throughout history. His emphasis on the importance of nature, both as a source of spiritual insight and as a moral guide, laid the groundwork for modern environmentalism, encouraging us to see the earth as a living reflection of the divine. Emerson's ideas on self-reliance and individuality have also left a lasting mark on the social and political movements of the 20th and 21st centuries, influencing those who strive for justice, equality, and personal freedom. Through his works, Emerson introduced a vision of the world in which each individual has the power to shape their own destiny, a vision that has encouraged generations to question external authority and to seek truth within themselves. His ideas about the spiritual potential of the individual and the sanctity of nature have provided a foundation for modern mindfulness practices, personal development, and environmental advocacy. His belief in the universal connection of all beings continues to inspire movements focused on collective action and interconnectedness, whether it's in the realm of social justice, civil rights, or global cooperation. As we navigate the complexities of our own lives in an increasingly interconnected and rapidly changing world, Emerson's work offers timeless wisdom for how to live with authenticity, integrity, and a deep respect for both the individual and the collective. His belief that the true path to peace and fulfillment lies in aligning ourselves with our highest principles and cultivating a deep connection with nature remains a guiding light for those seeking to find meaning in the modern world. Ultimately, Emerson's legacy is not confined to his lifetime or his writings. His ideas continue to be a source of inspiration for those who seek to live thoughtfully, creatively, and ethically. His call for individuals to trust their inner voice, to engage deeply with the world, and to act with moral clarity in the face of injustice offers a roadmap for personal and societal transformation. Emerson's philosophy reminds us that, in a world full of distractions and external pressures, the most important task is to remain true to ourselves and to live with purpose, authenticity, and compassion. Emerson's life and work serve as a testament to the power of the individual spirit to shape the world. His influence continues to reverberate through literature, philosophy, social movements, and spirituality. The journey he began in the 19th century is still ongoing, as his ideas continue to inspire those who seek to live more fully, to engage with the world more meaningfully, and to contribute to a more just, compassionate, and sustainable future. As we close this reflection on Emerson's life and legacy, let us remember that his work was not just about ideas, it was about action, about living in alignment with the highest ideals, and about transforming the world through individual and collective effort. The echoes of his thoughts still guide us today, encouraging us to trust ourselves, to live with integrity, and to seek the truth that lies both within and beyond ourselves.